Alright, everybody, welcome to another game design podcast here on Game Wisdom, where is in the art and science of games. I am Josh Bycer, and we are once again joined by owner of Gamedev Underground, Tim Ruswick, for another discussion about game design, as well as catching up about what's been going on. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm good. How are you?
I have been very busy, and I'm sure you have been the same.
Yes, it's crazy. Trying to run an entire game community and make a game all by yourself is interesting.
Yeah, for me, I've been going more in terms of reaching out and doing a lot more outside of YouTube. I've been contacting libraries around the country for doing presentations on game design, and I've gotten a few interests in California, but I am nowhere near done. I'll probably be doing this until probably 2020, maybe 2021, at the rate I'm going.
That's awesome.
And as for people who are on your side coming on, I had just got my second book published right here, Game Design Deep Dive Platformers. It's basically a top-down look at the philosophy and design of the platformer genre, from 2D and 3D, how the design works, good and bad examples, designing jumps, obstacles, you name it.
This will be fun because I just finished up a platformer.
Nice.
Wish I would have had your book because I went through a lot of drama with that game.
It took a while to get it all written. I think this was the largest I've written in terms of a book. Let's see, how many pages did it actually top out at? Looks like just over 135 in terms of everything in there. And I am right now in the final process of locking down my third book, which will be covering the horror genre and the design and philosophy of that.
Wow. Are you like breaking down games, like
Yeah.
playing a bunch, figuring out what the commonalities of the genres and all that?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and trying to come up with like popular or standardized design elements. It's why in the second book on platforming, I basically have an entire chapter breaking down all the kinds of jumps that you can possibly make in a game, all the kinds of obstacles that are in there, kind of the variables that go into the jump. So like how high you make how high you make the jump, the ascending speed, etc., as well as popular obstacle designs. And let's see if I can.
That was the single thing that took the longest. So, for those of you that don't know, Phylophobia was a game that I made after 4 years in development. It's a platformer about love being literal hell, where all the enemies are hearts. And the movement system got redone probably, I would say, 6-8 times. And it was so important. So I wish I would have had that chapter on jumping, because the gravity, the speed, the acceleration, how fast you go up, how fast you fall, whether you can move in the air, whether you have any kind of momentum control. Oh my god, dude, there's so much tiny little detail in that.
And one of the things I didn't really know too much about until I started doing the research was about kind of physics guide or physics influencing platforming, such as with Sonic, the N series, or even Super Meat Boy, where the game is constantly adjusting or picking up how the character moves and then translating that into the jump. Because traditional platformers, it's pretty much hard variables. You know, you will always ascend at this rate. You will only always jump this high. But with something like with Sonic, it's just constantly reading all the physics at play, which in then turn affects how you make that jumping trajectory.
That's so interesting. There's so many things in Phylophobia that I had to, I don't want to say fake, but like there are things that don't make physics sense. There are things that technically, if I told you they were in there, you'd be like, what? But like, they're there to make the player feel like what they're doing is good, even though like the game may be cheating in their favor. You know, like the coyote jump and the cue to jump. Like, for example, if you press the jump button a split second before you're on the ground, it cues the jump, and then it jumps as soon as you hit the ground. Things like that, even though they're like, it wouldn't make sense to put them in, like when you just think about it, like, no, well, they shouldn't jump if they're not on the ground. But when you take into account human psychology, human reaction time, and that a game is designed to make them feel like the character, not necessarily be 100% accurate, you get all these weird little tricks. That's interesting.
Yeah, like one of the ones I brought up is that many games, when they're checking to see whether or not the character is on the ground or they're not, if the check doesn't happen fast enough, you can do a jump after the character has already like walked off an edge, and it's
Yeah.
just before it actually starts falling. And some games will leave that in, other ones will just kind of like ignore it. But you have to be really careful in terms of the design because you don't want to use a move that the player has no understanding that's even in the
Right.
game. When I was doing the research, and for my fans watching this, they saw me play all manner of weird and crazy platformers. Like, did you know there was a Blues Brothers platformer game?
I did not. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was completely realistic because it involved them running around a magic jukebox eating cake that gave them muscles. You know, just like you remember that from the movie.
Wow. Yeah. Was that an official one or was that like a fan made?
No, that was an official game based off the Blues Brothers. And then the game just like
Weird.
ends all of a sudden. Like it's like level 34. It's like you beat the level. It's like you win. It's like okay, I guess I won that. Like it just came out of nowhere.
When
But
did it come out?
this was Super Nintendo. I want to say 93, 94, something like that. It's like right around the heights of the first movie. Let's see.
You
But
know,
yeah,
older games like that in the early area of the PC, I think there was a lot less of this idea of genres,
hmm
right? So you ended up with a lot of weirder, just crazy games. Now everything kind of fits in a box, you
yeah.
know? Like,
It was 1993 for the SNES version, but they just kept making like the same like kind of game over and over. But yeah, like some of like those older platformers would have like elements in them that never really explained to the player. Like Tom and Jerry for the Super Nintendo, you have a super jump, but you can only do it after you do a basic jump, and you have to jump like the split second you land from it. And we just found that out by like randomly pressing buttons while I was jumping around. Like there's no in-game way of knowing that.
that sounds
Or
like a glitch.
yeah,
like a,
or the Batman and Robin game that came out for the Super Nintendo that was just awful. Like they had a command to do a grapple jump, but it was tied to select, and nobody playing a platform would think to use select to jump. So like
yeah.
everyone who ran that game, including myself, had no idea how to play it. We just kept just randomly pressing things and hoping that we got past the first level.
You know, I think that's probably the single thing that has had, I mean, other than graphics and processing power, but the single biggest improvement our industry has made is like that understanding of what UX is, understanding of what onboarding is, understanding that the player knowing how to play the game is just as important as the things in the game,
hmm
right? Like we've come a long way, and a lot of people, there's been debates on the internet about how we're casualifying games,
hmm
but and maybe that's true in some ways, but like I think overall we've gotten a lot better at teaching people how to experience our thing.
Yeah.
Those old games were brutal that way, man. They did not teach you anything.
Yeah, onboarding has been a topic that we've been talking about a lot lately in terms of game design and structure. And I think it's still one thing a lot of new developers tend to struggle with when it comes to building
Yeah.
their game. I mean, for those of you like from Gamedev Underground's fan side watching this right now, I do a monthly indie game spotlight stream where I will play pretty much any game as long as it's from an indie developer. I don't care if it has one sale or 100 sales or more than that. And I will look at these games and try to give my opinions and my thoughts on it. And a lot of these games from like first time developers, it just is like here's the game, just throws you right in. There's no tutorial. Like it
Yeah.
assumes like you've already played 50 to 100 iterations or examples of the genre. Like one of my favorites is how many platformers from any devs are released, and there's not even a command or a tutorial that says press this button to jump. Like it assumes
Yeah.
we've all grown up playing those games. And
Yeah.
I've always said this: every game is somebody's first, and the best developers tend to be those that at least guide you through it. And the chat is mentioning Jekyll and Hyde. We actually played that game on stream about a week ago. I got further in it than I ever did when I was back in the old days. But yeah, that was a crazy one. And for people who don't know that one, basically you play as Dr. Jekyll trying to get to his wedding, and everybody in town is out to get him. It's never explained why, but like kids hit you with slingshots, women just walk up and slap you, and there's a guy walking around with a bomb. Like he just like walks up, just puts a bomb at your feet for no reason, and just walks away. And like when you get pissed off enough, you turn into Mr. Hyde, and then becomes a shooter, like a 2D side-scrolling shooter, as he's walking through like Demonville, shooting people with fireballs.
That's what I was like. Older games were so weird, and like they crossed genres, and they didn't care about the lines.
Oh
It's
yeah,
like,
oh yeah, and the cane does like absolutely nothing. And there's a part where if you don't have enough money, like people singing in the middle of the street will kill you in one hit, unless you know to have enough money to give them. And it's just like
so money is the key to life, is what that game is saying.
yeah, and also beware of dogs, birds, cats, children, women, men. And then there's just a guy like shooting like birds, and the birds are falling down on you. It's just like another, I guess, 18th century life was just very dangerous back then.
It's probably a very realistic depiction. We just weren't prepared for it.
Just like the Blues Brothers game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how life was.
hmm
Gotta be careful.
But yeah, like I guess here's a question for you. I guess I'll start our little Q&A. I got a question for you, Tim. What did you think of titles like Untitled Goose Game that kind of like blew up in terms of like popular culture?
It's funny you bring that up because I've been studying that game, and it's a very simple game. It's not, it's nothing crazy. It's got a very, I think, in terms of just marketing and appeal, I think it is different, right? And I think it says that it's different straight from the title, Untitled Goose Game. Like that's that's something you talk about. Like everybody makes a comment about that. Like it's interesting. And then I think because it's one of those games, like one of the rules for my games whenever I build a game, especially if I'm thinking about commercial viability, is can you look at a screenshot? And is it impossible for you to mistake that screenshot for another game?
Yeah.
It has to be impossible. If it's maybe, no, you're doing it wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Goose Game does that really well. You can't mistake that game for another game. It's just very visible. And then on top of that, I think it has a core central character, and that's really, really brandable for a lot of reasons. Like it's one of those things that people like to share and take. And then I think there's a lot of luck involved too. Like I don't think you ever know, like, okay, we're going to design this with a goose specifically for the memes. But it's one of those things that happens. So,
and like I know we definitely had that conversation last time you were on about just how much a strong aesthetic and presentation really does matter for these games. And I think you put it really well that can somebody look at this game and not be confused? Like they know exactly what this game is. They know it's a unique game. And I'm sure you probably heard the whole Enchanted Portals, like Cuphead controversy that happened lately too.
No, I missed that.
Well, there is a game there's a Kickstarter for a game called Enchanted Portals that it looks so much like Cuphead. Like they have like the same big band music in the trailer, same kind of like perspective in terms of where the characters are on screen, the bosses, but they feature original boss elements to the game. Like the boss designs in that game aren't the same as Cuphead, but it looks so much like it that people are saying that it's a clone or they're trying to steal Cuphead's thunder there. And it's such like a very awkward thing because I did a video on this and like I put both games trailers side by side, and you can see that there are aesthetics and design cues in Cuphead that Enchanted Portal makes use of. And it's like, I don't think developers were malicious. I just think they didn't think enough outside of that box, that they were so obsessed with chasing Cuphead that they essentially try to make another Cuphead.
Yeah. I mean, I think most developers Maybe they haven't gotten to the point where it's almost a finished product, but like I started game dev because I played Halo, and I was like, oh, I want to make one of these, so I tried to make Halo. And had I carried that through, I would have come out with a sci-fi shooter with a space marine. It would have been very, very similar. I think I saw the same thing with Darkest Dungeon, and I think there's two problems there. One is these games have such distinct art styles; they're very distinct.
Yeah.
Right, Darkest Dungeon, Cuphead, both. Like you can't. They follow that rule beautifully. Can you mistake them for another game? No, it's impossible. And so when these games have a lot of success, there's a lot of immediately, just by pure exposure, they get exposed to more people. Yep. And when there's more people, you reach every little circle on Earth. The circle that clones games, the circle that gets inspired by games, the circle that wants to make those games out of respect, the circle that wants to make those games to get rich, all the little people. And the more people you reach, the more those people you reach. Yeah. That being said, though, like you said, I don't know if it could be malicious. Like, I think there are a lot of people that try and copy successful games. That's pretty clear. Like, I think well, I don't want to say the popularity platformers. I think the reason so many developers make platformers is because of the indie game, the movie era, Super Meat Boy inspiration. I think that's a big part of it. It's like the genre, and they're trying to copy successful games. Well, what can I make? Oh, well, that's simple, and that's a game that was successful.
Yeah. And I think it was said in chat earlier that the platform or popular genres, a lot of the learning curve or a lot of like the learning is just baked into the genre. Like you buy a platformer, most people don't need a tutorial about what you're doing in that game. If you're buying a game like Darkest Dungeon, then yeah, you kind of need some guidance as to what the hell is going on there. And it's very, like you said, it's very easy to kind of take these games and go, I can just make this, or if I do it similar, I'll be as successful. But I think a lot of developers then tend to fail is that if you try to make somebody else's game, your game always seems like it's lesser than that. Like
they're missing the point. The point was to be different, but you came second, so you're not different.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the game Warsaw that came out, I think, 2 weeks ago. It was kind of like a World War II meets Darkest Dungeon. You're playing as the Polish Resistance. And it looks very much like Darkest Dungeon. The same thing, characters line up on the left, enemies on the right. They do several things differently, but it just really wasn't clicking with me there.
Yeah, I watched a playthrough of that, and I like, okay, you got the cover system, you got like objects, you got a different theme, fantasy, but yeah, it kind of came off to me as like, okay, let's make Darkest Dungeon, but different setting. That's what a lot of people do too, by the way. I've seen this in hundreds of indie games. I want to make FTL but underwater. I want to make this game but whatever, and they think that's enough to be distinct, but it's really not. Like,
and to Kendall's point in chat, tutorials don't need to be explicit if gameplay is intuitive enough. I think it depends on the genre itself. Like, again, one of the reasons why platformers and action-based games are so popular is that it's very much one-to-one. I press A, character jumps, so A makes a character jump. When you're playing a game like Darkest Dungeon or Stellaris or anything that has multiple layers of abstraction, you don't really get that one-to-one feedback. I mean, like, so many strategy games have failed to hook me because I just am like, I'm pushing buttons. What the hell is happening on the screen? I don't know. And then all of a sudden my army gets killed. Okay, like, what did I learn? Well, I pushed buttons and I lost. That's everything that I got from it.
I think and too, that's a very complex subject. There's so many levels to that because, like, okay, UI can be way more important than most people think it can be.
Oh, yes.
Like, for example, let's say you have a mouse. That's your input device. You hover over a thing. If it highlights, that's way different than if it doesn't, right? It tells you immediately, okay, maybe this isn't interactable, right? If at a later point it stops highlighting and it goes gray, that tells you something else. Okay, it's no longer available. If you highlight over a button and like targeting reticles appear on the screen and start bouncing up and down, then you're like, oh, well, maybe I'm targeting that area. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like the same system, and I've with my current game Cyberpunk, the stealth hacking roguelike, like I've seen this so much. Like the feedback that you give the player for their controls can be actually more important than what the thing does. Telling the player what it does, delivering that information properly. And the thing is, like, a lot of people don't understand that depth by itself does not equal complexity.
Well,
They think that if they make something more complex, that it's more deep, but you don't those things aren't always one-to-one, right? You can have more elegant designs that reduce the complexity but increase the depth. And it's UI is one of the ways that you can do that. With a really good UI that gives that feedback, you can reduce your need for a tutorial or things like that up front, because you're basically visually conveying information when you need it, like about what you're trying to do, you know?
And I've said that many times, that depth and complexity are not always the same. Because a lot of people will throw that at you, that, this game is complicated, so surely it must be deep. But
Yeah.
no, it doesn't work like that. And like talking about like UI design, I think there's two really good examples that I've been thinking about. The first one is, I don't know if you play the game King of Dragon Pass or Six Ages that just came out on PC.
No.
It's kind of like a narrative strategy game. It's one of those games that for a lot of people, King of Dragon Pass is a holy grail kind of design. So the entire game is essentially like a spreadsheet, but with story tied to it. You have like various advisors who tell you things to do. So the problem I ran into was on the UI, when you go to a screen that shows like your various buildings, there's all these little symbols on like various next to them. So I thought, if I put my mouse over them, surely a tooltip would pop up and tell me what that means. No, it doesn't do that. So I have to go click on the little help icon, all the way in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Then that tells me what those symbols mean. And again, like, you don't want to have like you always want to avoid layers in your UI. And like as Kendall was saying right there, I think right perfect. Like tooltips are a godsend, because you want that immediate feedback to the player to know, okay, if I put it over here, this does that. If I click on this, it does this. And another example, as you said, in terms of giving the player that information, like Darkest Dungeon had, I think, I don't want to say it's a huge slip up, but it's a pretty noticeable failure in their UI. By the fact that when you have skills that have a % chance to proc, it doesn't calculate it for you. Like, you have to do it manually.
Yeah.
Like, it'll say, this skill's 100% chance, this character has 50% resistance, so it becomes a 50% chance. But you have to do all those calculations yourself, and it starts to get very complicated when you run into enemies with multiple resistances, and your skills start to get upgraded, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, and that's one of those things, like, Darkest Dungeon, pretty much the whole game is UI. So the UI is super, super important. And I played a lot of Darkest Dungeon when I was kind of in my prototyping phase of my next project, trying to figure out, like, okay, what makes this game tick? What's the game loop like? What's the progression like? And I noticed that, like, it had a lot of the depth, but it made it tedious to figure out, like, I think by not giving the information, your focus was a little bit different, and a lot of times I felt like I was just kind of guessing. And that didn't feel very strategic to me, versus, like, if you give the player all the information they need, then it's more about optimizing your choices and figuring out what's the best choice in this scenario, versus when you don't give them that, they're trying to figure out the information or just end up guessing. And then if they're guessing, they make mistakes and they don't understand the ramifications, or they don't understand what they did or why it didn't work. And that can end up ending sessions prematurely, right? Because it's just like, okay, I lost and I'm frustrated because I don't know why I lost, and now my guys are dead.
Yeah. Or like when I load up Stellaris for the first time, I get the entire screen has UI on all four corners, and I'm just only like, what am I supposed to be focusing on right now? I hit a button, something moves, okay. Like, for people watching me play that stream, it was just I think it was like an hour of nightmare of just, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. The game tells me to click on something, I click it, I get nothing in terms of feedback. Yay,
Yeah.
you researched something, but why did I research
Exactly.
it?
What are the ramifications of that? What
Mm-hmm.
happened? What did that change?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that in the menu? How do I understand that? How
Yeah.
does that fit into the bigger game? There's so many questions that like come up. You know what's interesting too is like I see a lot of mobile games that actually go the complete opposite route. And they have like those little things that'll black out your entire screen and have those little pointy like arrows and
Yeah.
stuff. Click here, click here. But on those, even though it's walking me through it, I just find myself mindlessly tapping, not
Yep.
actually understanding the thing, just okay, boom, 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 clicking the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't get it. It's like there's a beautiful balance to like conveying information, the size of the information, the speed of the information, when it's relevant, how it connects to other things. It is such an unbelievably hard thing to nail down that it takes so much iteration to do right.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And as we've said on the chat many times, like when it comes to good UI, nobody will ever notice it. But when you do it wrong, everybody is going to call you out for it.
Yeah. It's so in my game Cyberpunk, I have not done a tutorial yet, and it's something that I really needed to do. But I wanted to lock down the core game
Yeah.
before I made the tutorial. And what's interesting is I'll get playtest videos, so people will record themselves playing and they'll send them to me as a playtest. When people watch my stream and they watch me play the game and they understand the game, the way that they react to it is completely different than when they play the game on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Like and I understand that there's a disconnect there. Like part of that is my fault. It's the UI, it's the onboarding, it's all that stuff. It's lack of tutorial. But it can literally change how people think about your game, whether they like it or not. Like just the act of teaching them the game can change their like rating of it, let's say
Mm-hmm.
theoretically from like a 2-star to like a 5-star.
Yep.
If you just teach them how to understand it better. And there's so many, like especially when you go through Steam reviews and stuff, there's so many reviews where people will say something like, this game is confusing, it's hard, it's stupid, I don't know how to play it. But what they're not saying is the game is stupid, because it's got other like 5-star reviews with 100 hours played, right? What that's actually saying is, I didn't understand this. So there's a problem there with that type of person and that type of game,
Mm-hmm.
where the developer failed to convey the proper information at the right time, you know?
Yeah. And as the chat is talking about in terms of you don't Cantankerous Game says you don't have a lot of time to teach people, and yep, that is true. Like we've been saying this as well. There's good 30 to 40 games being released daily these days. Like you don't have the time anymore to say that I don't like, I'm stuck, but I'll, try this game over the next few weeks. No, it's I'm stuck. I have 39 other games I can play. Why should I spend time on yours being confused?
Yeah. And certain platforms and certain types of games, that's even worse. And like Cantankerous is saying, like I think strategy games people give a little bit more time to learn. Mobile games, I literally I have like zero patience. Install, open, play for, it might take me 90 seconds, literally 90 seconds before your game gets uninstalled. Like never again. You lost me forever because you didn't teach me the game properly.
Yeah.
It's
But
important.
yeah. For me, my metric is usually 15 to 30 minutes you have when I install your game as to whether or not I'm going to keep playing it. And if
Yeah.
anything annoys me or frustrates me in that short period of time, that game is usually out.
Yeah.
And
It's great. My friend's daughter, I hand her my mobile games every once in a while. I love when she comes over because I'll hand her my mobile games. It'll take her 4 seconds and she'll just say, this game's stupid, I don't want to play it. Like, you played it for 4 seconds. It was
Yeah.
4 seconds. But it's great. It's great feedback because when I handed her a game that she played for 20 seconds, I was like, okay, we're making progress.
you're getting there.
Yeah.
You're almost at a minute. A few more games.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see. Peter asks, are there 30 to 40 good games released every day, though? And that is definitely no. There are not 30 to 40 good games being released daily. It's just not possible to have that amount of quality, but they take up space on the store. They're taking up the consumer's attention. Like,
Are we talking about Steam or are we talking about generally?
I've been just talking about Steam, but who knows if we talk generally? That's not even counting the mobile space as well.
Yeah, I think if we bring in mobile, I think we're looking a lot more. I would say probably. The thing is, it's not just about good games; it's about findable good
Mhm.
games. It's about discoverable good games, and so I think there's a lot of good games that get buried.
Oh yes, I mean, my fans know that I've been playing a lot of smaller indie games, and there are some that I really enjoy. There was a title Vision Soft Reset that came out at the beginning of this year that nobody played, and the reason I know that is I look on the Steam page and it has less than 10 reviews after being out for a year,
Yeah,
and unfortunately, like it doesn't matter how great your game is if nobody plays it. And like
yeah.
I know we had a discussion, I think either the last time or the time before, that many developers struggle with the PR, with the discoverability side of making a video game.
Yeah, it's because a lot of that stuff is one. It usually is the opposite skill set of developers, right? Not to stereotype, but
Hmm.
I think there could be an argument to be made that a lot of developers are introverts. They don't.
Oh
They like to
yes.
spend time working on their things in their room. They're maybe not great with people, and even if they are, like that is a completely different skill set. Running a business and marketing a business is a completely different skill set
Yep.
than technically building a thing. So you got that, but then also we talked about the Goose Game. There are things in there that cannot be analyzed and quantified, right? You
Hmm.
cannot like design a goose meme strategy, right, based on
Yep.
that game's success. You can't say, okay, here's what you do if you want to make your game blow up as far as
Hmm.
memes. You got to put a goose in it. You got to make the goose honk. Like, no, you can't, because that game is like a one-off thing. And the problem is like when these clones come out, when they try to replicate the thing, but they realize there's so many factors that they missed. They missed
Hmm.
the timing. They missed the uniqueness of it at that time, right? They missed who knows what they missed. You never know what you missed. That's the problem.
Yep.
So like it I believe that marketing and business is just like making a prototype. It's trying something and seeing how it works. And
Hmm.
if it works, you do it again. If it doesn't work, you try something new,
Yep.
right? That's what iteration is. That's how you make good games. I think that's also how you do good marketing.
Hmm.
But again, just like game dev, it's a lot easier to clone someone else's design than it is to create your own. And that ends up what a lot of people do, right?
Yep. And like with something like Untitled Goose Game, again, you'll have indie developers say, "My whole marketing plan is make game, have PewDiePie cover it, question mark profit." And you can, again, like I've said this before, that a lot of developers will look at a game's success and not really understand why it succeeded. They think
Right.
that it succeeded because Markiplier, PewDiePie, Ninja, whoever played it. But the reason why it succeeded was something else, and that was simply the outcome of that success.
Right.
And again, you'll have developers go, well, why is my game not flying off the shelves? Why isn't PewDiePie playing my game? Well, what did you do in terms of marketing? I don't know. And then it's like, okay, so how did you expect that game to succeed? Another good example, something like Getting Over It with Benefati. That game blew up as well. And then it was one of those times like, how do I make a game like that? Well, you can't really. Like some of these games tend, I think, generally be like one-offs. It's a niche experience that hit that perfect. Hit all like the vectors or targets. You can't really, I think, emulate that success.
Right. And that's the problem is like both of those things you said, if you attribute it to the thing,
Hmm.
you made a problem because you can make the exact same thing, not get the same amount of attention and just fail. If you attribute it to like the people playing it, well, then your success is at the mercy of somebody else,
Yep.
right? Like you are not in control of that. So either one of those is a mistake because both of those end with either you making something that's already been done before, or you end up putting your entire success on someone else saying yes
Hmm.
or no, right?
Yep.
Uh, People need to. I think the lesson from this like Goose Game or from Bennett Foddy or any of these other things is not the thing. It's not okay. Make a game like that and then you're successful.
Hmm.
It's what do those games do well, right? Well, they're really, really, really playable by content creators, right?
Hmm.
Because what do content creators do? They make commentary, right? And those games are fantastic. People love to see their content creators get frustrated or angry or have things to say. And both of those games are really great at that. One, I mean, both of them do it through humor, but I think the Bennett Foddy game does it by frustration and like, you know, watching Markiplier play that game, for example, is just like, it's hilarious how frustrated he gets doing that stuff. Those are the lessons. Like how do you make people talk about your thing? These things are inherently talkable. Talk aboutable, if that's a word. Talk aboutable. There we go. We said it here first.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so if you design stuff like that and you really think about that, I think you can create something unique that can hit properly. Whereas just cloning the thing, I think, is a mistake.
Yeah. And we've had this discussion before on our live show about the idea of quote-unquote stream-friendly games, YouTube-friendly games like that, and they've become their own little niche. And I think, as Kendall put it, while influencers are nice for publicity, but if the game isn't fun for anyone to get into, it won't normally succeed. And, like, for myself, like, if people just watching, we went through Five Nights at Freddy's, I think, last week, and that game just didn't do it for me. Like, and again, I'll probably go and whole rant about that in my horror book. But, like, I find modern horror games just don't really work for me, because they tend to seem to focus more on the people watching rather than the people who are playing those games.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see the rise of that. Like we are. I think Goose Game, and I don't know if there's any of this was intentional or not, but I think you can start to see the rise of games that are designed to be more interesting to watch somebody play than to play.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be a thing, and I think that's just one of those things because I think art is directly tied to business. I think it always has been. I think art evolves with business, and I think the art that is most profitable will always tend to be the most profitable or the most widely available art, you know. So it's just, that's one of those things. And you know, industry will change, something new will come out. Nobody expected that watching people play video games was going to be a thing 15 years ago. Something else will come out, I'm sure, but just you got to roll with the punches and evolve.
Yeah. Just like nobody thought Battle Royale was going to go places, and Fortnite took over really well like that. And going back to what we were just saying, like, Fortnite is a good example of Epic looked at H1Z1, King of the Hill, etc., and said, okay, that's how this game is. Let's do something different. But not only do something different, but let's do something, you know, highly crafted, well executed. And it worked. Like, that's just like a perfect case of kind of like the Blizzard formula of, you know, iterate and evolve. It's not just we're going to copy somebody's game. It's we're going to look at this design and then we're going to take it in a different direction.
Right. People, so that's one of those things where people think, okay, they made Fortnite a battle royale. That's what made it successful. They think battle royale equals success. And maybe currently in the current climate, those are the games that are taking off, but it's not the thing. People forget that that was a huge risk. They changed their entire game and they did it very quickly. That could have been a major disaster for that title. That could have like completely destroyed that title. And they were lucky enough to have it succeed. And now it's like, went crazy. Fortnite is like on Minecraft levels of craziness. And there are very few games that have achieved that kind of ridiculous mainstream appeal, but it's a huge risk. And so the message there isn't to, oh, we'll put a battle royale on your game. The message there is to pay attention, see what works, you know, pay attention to other stuff that's working and see how you can put your own unique spin on it and make it work.
Yeah. And again, like all the games that we've played, the best ones, like, there is no such thing, I think, as a 100% original game anymore. We could maybe argue that back in the 80s, when I spoke with Brian Collin, who did Rampage. Like, back then, there were no genre definitions. You know, we have our character run around and jump. Now we have a platformer genre. What if we put a gun in our game of a first-person camera? We have an FPS. So, like, the basic genre definitions are kind of set. And I mean, even with, like, any game that I play, like, I see any independent developers will send me keys to, like, crazy ideas. I can still spot elements that they were inspired by or came before. But you have to be able to take that next step. You can't just say, I'm going to make Breakout. for the 10th millionth time that somebody's trying to make a Breakout clone, or Mario, or Robotron. You have to be able to do something with it. You have to say something unique, because that's what's going to drive people to your game. Again, why should I play the fifth take on Darkest Dungeon? I still love Darkest Dungeon. Like, my fans, like when we play like Darkest Dungeon like games, we always say this game needs Wayne June in it. We need more games with Wayne June doing narration, and that will just improve things just a little bit.
Yeah. I think a lot of people there's a couple different segments of people. I see the people on my channel too that are like, well, I want to make something completely unique that's never been done before. That's impossible.
Yeah.
Let's be real here. And even if you could, let's say you could create something that's completely unique that no one's ever even seen before, nobody would know how to play it. Because
exactly.
that's what makes genres work, is that we understand them, we like them, and we want some kind of familiarity mixed with some kind of novelty, right?
Yeah.
But like, I think that's the wrong thing. I think, one, from an art perspective, you should be trying to put a little bit of you in your thing, right? Because that's the one thing nobody can copy. Like, Darkest Dungeon was the result, and I've listened to podcasts by the Darkest Dungeon guys. Like, they were really into role-playing games. They were really into all that stuff. And it shows that game is dripping with world building and interesting lore and all kinds of stuff because of their love for it, right? They put themselves in that game.
Yeah.
And that's what made it work. Like, the second you copy that, one, your game has no soul, because you're trying to copy somebody else and you don't feel as strongly as they do, right? And then two, like, you're always a step behind them, no matter what. Like, if people describe your game as it's like Darkest Dungeon, they're literally, Darkest Dungeon is probably getting sales every time your game gets viewed, right?
Yeah.
Like, people are like, you're a step behind them every time.
Yeah.
So you need to really think outside the box, like, and think of what you bring to the table. And I think most of the time that has to do with you personally. Like, this is your art. What do you bring to the table that nobody else can?
Yeah.
Right.
And as a quick tangent to Kendall's point about world building gets stepped over in indie games, I love games that really go like all in with world building. Like, that's definitely its own topic that I would love to like spend some time discussing. To board fans' point, that something new that someone has never seen before doesn't necessarily mean nobody would know how to play it. Designers would and can make a guide for those who want it. I think it really depends on what is the unique thing about your game. Like, there's another tendency I see from a lot of indie developers who want to do something unique, that they'll just go crazy with the UI. I'm going to use the insert key for my jump in a platformer.
Yeah.
And like you said, like, just because something is unique doesn't right off the bat make it a good title or a good design. And you still, like, I've said this before, that I do feel there are standards of good design out there. I know a lot of developers don't want to hear that, because nobody wants to hear that there is an acceptable way or a standard way of doing something. But I kind of equate to like designing a car. You could design a car with the steering wheel in the back seat and brake pedals on the ceiling. That would make your car unique. But would it make it a good car, a good vehicle for people to use? Probably not.
There are trade-offs in every design decision. So, like, let's say you put the steering wheel in the back seat. What you're doing is you're making it unique, but you're making it less usable. You're losing how, like, let's say instead of steering wheel, let's say, I don't know, some kind of weird device that steers the car. Right there, you're making it unique. Like, hey, this doesn't have a steering wheel, but like, everybody knows how to use a steering wheel. Steering wheels is the way that we know how to interact with cars. You're losing something by that. Are you going to get people that maybe want to try a car without a steering wheel? Sure, but like, those are the kind of things that like don't survive past the novelty stage. Like, okay, now I played with it, it's cool. Okay, now I want a steering wheel.
Yeah, now I want to do something else. Yeah.
There's a lot of novelty games that have come out recently too, where they're like I played a game called Human Fall Flat with my girlfriend the other day, and the game was hilarious. It was awesome. It's a physics-based thing where you run around and you grab stuff with your hands, and you have to control the muscles with the L and R key. But it was hilarious for the first 10 minutes, and we had so much fun. And then it was kind of like, okay, I'm bored with this. I experienced this thing. It's not there's nothing here. Like it's hilarious for content creators, I'm sure, but like,
Like just like
eh,
that I Am Bread game that came out
yeah,
a few years ago.
exactly.
It's amazing, it's unique. Then what do you do? Like, and that was like my problem with it. Like, and I think for a lot of, like, for my fans watching, they know we've played a lot of games that just feel like it's a prototype to something bigger. Like, it's a great concept, but that's all that this game is. Now, if you're selling it for like $1 or $2, okay, we can look past that. But if you're expecting to get like $15 to $20 out of an idea that has maybe 5 to 10 minutes of unique gameplay, nobody's going to really jump into that.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic segue into progression systems because
Mm-hmm.
you look at Darkest Dungeon, you put that in front of somebody and you make them play a dungeon over and over again, they'd be like, why am I playing this?
Mm-hmm.
What This is kind of repetitive and boring.
Mm-hmm.
But you add that progression system on. You add the death, the permadeath, you add the upgrading all your systems and
Mm-hmm.
min-maxing your gold carrying in and out. Suddenly you have something that's really, really engaging.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of games hold me for even an hour, 2 hours. I played Dark Center for the first time probably like 6 months ago, and I put like 15 hours into it over a week, which is insane for me. But it was the progression system on top of that game that makes it so interesting. Even though, I mean, there's a lot of strategy to it, but like you said, the game doesn't really convey that well enough. So sometimes you feel like you're guessing. But the progression system, hauling the gold out, upgrading your thing, that whole loop
Mm-hmm.
is what kept me going in that game.
Yeah. And like a good progression system or persistent elements in a game, I think are very important to keeping the player invested in it. Like I think there's like two very wide lines or two like polar opposites. You have games that it's a very short gameplay loop, but then you have the persistence on top of that that just keeps adding and adding to it. And then you have games that there's not a lot of persistence, but it's just like a solid game like all the way through. Like a lot of action games can maybe fit that. That you're not
Yeah.
really changing or growing too much, but it's just such a great design that that's enough to keep you motivated.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that the like action games have a lot going on, so it's easier to get pulled into. Like if you do it right, there's a lot going on screen. Whereas like some games, they have that very simple loop. But what another thing that Darkest Dungeon does well that I think a lot of games can benefit, even action games, is like Darkest Dungeon doesn't have one loop. It has a lot of loops.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of gameplay loops. Like there's the loop of going between rooms to find a room. Then there's the combat loop of the whole actual play. Then there's the bigger loop outside of that of
Mm-hmm.
like multiple mission types. Then there's the bigger loop outside of that of like upgrading your city and all that. And there's always one going on at any one time. So at any one time when you think like, what can I do? Well, I got to do this thing. There's always a next thing to do, right? Sometimes without that, people get lost and they don't know what to do. Like if you ever played shooters where there's some shooters where it's like, here you go, here's your gun, and then you just like run, shoot stuff, and it's like, okay, like generally you expect from those kind of games that I got to get to the end, right? But like if that's it, then it's kind of like, okay, you do that 2 or 3 times, and it's like, what else?
What else you got for me there?
Yeah,
Yeah, and Darkest Dungeon thing is really great. As you said, like there's always something in the back of your mind. There's always a goal, whether it's the short-term goal of I need to get through this dungeon, or the long-term goal of I don't care about my characters right now. I just need these heirlooms so I can upgrade my blacksmith. So then I can get better weapons. So then I can go do this. And there's always like you can always like kind of trace where you're trying to go. And if your game doesn't have that, then as you said, they just get lost. Like again, it goes back to I'm just pushing buttons and I'm hoping something works.
yeah. The why question is really important too, because Darkest Dungeon,
Mm-hmm.
like you understand it, like there's always a why, right?
Mm-hmm.
I gotta fit this piece in because I need the gold to do this. I gotta fit these heirlooms in because I need to upgrade my stump, like or whatever. A lot of indie games, especially when they're early on in the developer's career, right? they miss the why. They make a platformer, but they don't give you a why. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why are you here? Why are you going towards the goal? Why are you jumping on these enemies' heads and killing them and murdering them? Why are you okay? Like, what's going on? And I think I setting up that why. And why doesn't always have to be fictional, right? It doesn't have to be a story. Like in Philophobia, there's a very clear setup to what happens and kind of why you're on this journey, but like you don't even need the fictional why. You can have a upgrade why like Darkest Dungeon does, or like a progression why, or a and even like an action based why, right? Like, you know, who knows? I just why is a big question that I ask a lot.
Yeah, and I've said this, like when I was doing my pieces about tutorial design, whether they're written or in the video, I said that for every element in your game, you need to be able to explain to the player, what am I doing? How do I do it? Why do I do it? And like you said, the why is often the part that a lot of developers leave out because it is the hardest. You know, why should I be doing this? And you can teach the player how every button on your UI works, but if they don't know why they're pushing it, they're not making that connection. And again, this has been one of the issues why I don't get into grand strategy games, because I don't have that background. So when I'm pushing buttons or I'm telling people to do something, I don't know what that's actually going to do. Why am I building this? Why am I making sure my city is happy here? I don't know. So then if I win, I don't know how I won. If I lose, now I feel frustrated because I don't know why I'm losing. And again, like, why should I keep playing a game like that?
Yeah. It without a why, it makes loss meh, and it makes winning not really interesting. You know, like people. I see people that make fun of tropes in games or like books and stuff. Like, why is there a common trope that like this guy's family got murdered and then now he's on the hunt for revenge? Because that's a strong why. You know, like revenge, finding who murdered your wife. Yeah, that's like, okay, you understand that motivation. Like, boom, there you go. That pushes the whole plot forward. Like, you know why this guy's doing it. If this guy is hunting for somebody, that makes no sense. Okay, what is he, a stalker? That's kind of weird. You know, like what's going on? But oh, his wife got murdered. Oh shit! Like he's, you know, you get that, you feel that.
Yeah.
So many games miss that.
And like we said, like it doesn't have to be a complicated why. Again, Mario, there is not a 40 minutes of plot in a Mario game. Peach gets kidnapped, Mario goes save her. We don't need Bloodborne levels of lore to explain that. Although Bloodborne meets Mario, that could be, there's an idea for anyone watching right there.
See, that is okay. People forget that part about Mario, right? When you think of Mario, you think running, jumping, Goombas. But at least I don't. I don't remember about the princess. But you're right. Like when I played that as a kid, like that was the whole point. Like the princess is in another castle. Oh shit, we got to go to that other castle.
Yeah,
we got to keep going. We got to find her. Like it was really, really, really important. And it, without it, like, and like I said, even without a fictional why, like upgrading or collecting or you know, giving that graphical sense of gratification or feedback, like Islanders, the game by Jonas Tyroler, placing down buildings and getting points, like maximizing your points, that's a good why too. Just it's really chill, right? It's really like you just place it and it feels so good to plop down a building and then have those points like go there. That's a why too, right? Like it's just it feels great to do.
Yeah, we played that one, I think, a few months ago. And again, like, it's one of those games, it's very unassuming. You know, very casual, very light city builder. But again, it gets that feeling right. That I place these buildings down, I get my little score going up. There's a challenge to it. And by the end of that play, I think everyone who was watching was kind of on board for that title. And again, like, as we said earlier, like, it's very hard to explain why that game worked. Because you can look at it and say, oh, it's just, you know, cute graphics. Or, you know, it's considered a quote-unquote casual game. But it's all these like competing elements that come together for it to work.
Yeah. It's really I talked to Jonas actually the other day. We were talking about it, and he mentioned that like when he designs a game, he wanted to make sure that it was something that the player would want to do out on their own. Like if you could go do it with no negative consequences and you could just make it happen, would you want to do the thing? Hang out on a tropical island and build building? Yeah, that sounds actually kind of fun to be like in a chill, relaxed environment on some random island. For me, that sounds amazing. And like I'm working on a hacking stealth game where you hack and take down corporations. If I could do that in a fantasy world without going to jail or like, that sounds awesome. I would love to play that fantasy. So like, I think that whole fantasy thing too, of like why you're doing the thing, like we talked about the why, but like the underlying, I guess a fantasy is probably the best word that I can say. Like Islanders doesn't have a story. It doesn't have a murder plot or anything you're trying to solve, but it's got such a good vibe to it that it can kind of pull you in regardless. Like the whole idea of the game, the whole setting of the game, the game says a lot without actually saying anything, right? Like with the music and the relaxing ocean sounds and the procedure generated islands and the chillness of it, the whole aesthetic and the whole mood of the game is very, very powerful.
Yeah. And taking this back to persistent systems, one thing that I want to talk about and get your thoughts on as well as the chat is the shop simulator genre. It's one of my favorite genres, but there have not been, I think, too many games that I think have wowed me as much in it. So I'm talking about games such as Racketeer, as I think one of the big name examples. And these are games that have very simple gameplay loops, but it has a huge amount of persistence and progression. You start making a sword. Now you're going to make a better sword. You're going to send your people out. They're going to bring back more stuff. So you can make bigger stuff. And very simple, but again, it just keeps you... It always keeps that, I think, dangling that carrot in front of you as the next big thing. And I've yet to find a more modern example of past Racketeer that I think nailed that hook all the way. I don't know if you played the game, Moonlighter, that came out, I think, last year. It was kind of it was almost like it was a roguelike meets a shop simulator. And I felt like it didn't quite get that loop done right.
Yeah, those genres are really complicated for me because there are so many ways to do progression systems like that, and you really have to understand because basically what you're doing is you're setting your own goals in those games, right? And so you have to kind of understand what a person's going through and what they would be thinking, what kind of goals they would want to set, and make that accessible, and make just enough of it accessible to keep you going, but not make too much accessible to just make you overwhelmed, right? It's a balancing act. I think that's over my head.
And I think what you just said is another really good point. Again, kind of keeping with this theme of onboarding, getting the player involved. You always have to be careful just how much do you hit the player with over the head right from the beginning. Oh, mouth just completely went out there from the beginning. Because you run into those issues where some games will just go, here's 50 menus and 80 choices. And you're going to do it all from the very first second of playing. And then the player is just, completely caught off guard. But then you have games where we're going to give you one choice, and then 2 hours later, we're going to introduce the next thing. Yeah. And then the game doesn't officially begin for at least another 25 hours of playing. And you have, again, they're both wrong for different reasons.
Right. I was prototyping a city builder, and it was really interesting. So I kind of did things differently, but I kind of pulled from the genre, and I was trying to come up with something kind of unique. And what I did was I had these buildings that would unlock other buildings.
Yeah.
Right. And then I would do a play test, and I would have people play, and they wouldn't know that building unlocked another building, even though the description said this unlocks this other building. Right. And so what they would do is they would play the game and be like, oh, well, but there's not that many buildings.
It's not that deep of a game.
Yeah. You couldn't see all the other buildings because the game was bad at teaching them that they needed to place the buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So then what I did was I made it to where all the buildings showed up, but they were just locked, and you'd hover over them and say unlocked by
Mm-hmm.
building, whatever. But then when you hover over and you're in the build menu and you see all these different buildings, it's like, whoa, like
What am
what
I
is all this?
doing? Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's both of those are bad in their own way, but I think it's important to look at design as a series of problems that you have to solve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is identifying your problem. Some people focus on the wrong problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? They think, oh well, this game's not fun, so this game will be more fun when I add more stuff to it or whatever, and they focus on the wrong problem and they solve the wrong. But if you understand that, okay, right now with this current UI system, people feel overwhelmed. So the problem I have to solve is how do I make people feel less overwhelmed while teaching them that there's additional content here, right?
Yeah.
If they identify that problem, once you do that, you can come up with a bunch of different ideas on how to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But that problem discovery, I think, is more important than problem solving, because if you can clearly identify a problem, it's really easy to get tons of solutions, right? Not all of them are good, but like I can right now, if I had a problem on this live stream, I'm sure everybody in chat would have a good concept of it, you know?
Yeah. And yeah, like one of the developers watching this, I know Shark, did a game Chromasia that was a tactical strategy game with like rock paper scissor, basically a rock paper scissor units on there. Like we played it on stream. I know we've talked about this many times, that he made the tutorial so organic or so like kind of like behind the scenes that a lot of people felt this is just some dumb strategy game, so basic, who cares about it? But there's a lot of depth under the surface in terms of the tactical layer, in terms of like the scale, like leveling grind or powering up. And again, it's tough because he could have gone the opposite direction and just put everything right at the start, make the tutorial super nitpicky, make everything like very involved. But then you have people complaining, this game is, I'm playing this game for 5 hours, it's still, giving me tutorial lessons, I'm getting bored or I'm getting frustrated by how slow it is. And it's hard. Again, like, there's no one size fits all. This is, again, why action games have always been easier to convey. Like we said with Mario, you load it up, Princess Peach is captured, run to the right, press A to jump. Okay, we're in, sock it to me there.
Yeah. I think there's not even a perfect solution either, because like different people learn at different speeds, different people read at different speeds, different people have different experiences with the same genre. Like if you have tooltips and you have helpful tips and everything all along the way for a city builder, and you bring someone in that's really experienced with city builders, that's going to get in their way. But if you have someone that's never played a city builder, they don't have a what's going on? What am I doing? So I think I made a video recently about like accessibility and making your games playable and accessible to people. And I talked about like a lot of people think of accessibility as like just catering to people with disabilities or making your game more playable for different kinds of disabilities. But I think accessibility is way more than that. I think accessibility is making your game accessible, like literally a definition of accessible. If you can do things like customize whether or not the tooltips or the helpful tips come up, right, then you're catering to both sides. Like, okay, I don't understand what's going on, I need helpful tips, let me turn them on. Okay, these tips are getting in the way, I know exactly what I'm doing, just get out of my way, let me do it. You can turn them off, right? Little things like that can make a huge difference in the amount of people that can get into your game, because some people like to play games differently, right? Like you look at Minecraft, there's a creative mode and there's a survival mode. Those are two different modes, right? Like Minecraft could have been one of them, but Minecraft has both of them on purpose because some people just want to make stuff and some people like the aspect of like surviving, even though it's they share similarities of the same game. They're different modes on purpose, because different people like to play different ways.
I'm going to get up for 1 second. I'm going to close my window because this lawnmower is getting closer and closer. I'll be back in 10 seconds.
All right. Mike, I'm a Bitcoin guy.
There you go. That should be a little bit better. But, yeah, like, I've played a lot of city builders who, like, the UI will be all over the place. That,
Yeah.
we'll have the button commands in the bottom left, resources upper right, the menu to the upper left, and there's definitely, like, you always have to pay attention to, like, what the player's experiencing in terms
Yeah.
of how do you present this information to them. Yeah.
Yeah. There's subtleties in that too. Like on a UI, how big an element is pretty much tells you how important it is related to other items, right? So resources, if you make them huge, people are going to be like, oh, this is a heavy focus on resource management, right? If you make them tiny, you're like, okay, they kind of fit the background. Maybe make the buildings bigger. There's size, there's color, there's visibility, there's all kinds of stuff. And all these little pieces of your UI, all these little things can basically, they're a map to, okay, this is what you should see as important, right? This is the important thing, and that can change over time too.
Yeah.
You ever heard the concept of 3 reads?
No.
So there's a I forget who said it, but there was a GDC talk where the guy talked about it, and basically in poster design, in Hollywood poster design, they've got the 3 reads. They've got the stuff that you can see from far away.
Okay.
They've got the stuff that, like, the big title, right, and the actor's face. Then they've got the stuff that you can see like closer, like, okay, it comes out October, whenever, and then only the stuff that you can see right when you're there, which is like, all the producers and all that whatever stuff. And that size is directly correlated to which thing is more important, right? The exposure of the thing is more important. Then there's the release date. Then there's all the other stuff. And that concept is so important because it carries over to marketing. It carries over to UI design. It carries over to all kinds of stuff.
And, like, one of the things that drives me nuts as, like, a UI convention a lot of developers use is that they'll organize things in alphabetical order, but alphabetical order is not always the best way of organizing elements. Like, they'll have, like, the UI, and, like, you need to build your food, or you need to build, like, your food producing buildings first, and that's, like, the 6th thing down the list. And, okay, so what's the first thing on the list? I don't know, make a bridge. Okay,
Right.
but bridges aren't important. And, like, I picked up a quick little screenshot from my book here. If you look right here for the Lost Vikings, you can see the UI. It's very much laid out that you have the main screen, I can see, and then you have the UI along the top. And again, it's a great way of, again, framing. You want to kind of, like, frame your UI to make it easier for people to process. That, okay, here's my main screen, I'm going to focus on this. We have these elements over here. You don't want things just all over the place.
Right. And I think there are scenarios where even things of the same type should be separated too. Like, for example, I've seen games that will put food, water, metal, wood, all that stuff together. But what if the food and water are actually like your health? What if you can die by not having enough food? Would that make more sense to put the food and water next to the health bar or whatever, versus near the rest of the resources? Contextually separating those things out tell the player a different message, right? Like, you can do a lot with, like, placement and size and color and all that. Apparently I'm a Bitcoin guy. Bitconnect.
Yeah, and like you said, like, these are very subtle elements that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And
They're so important.
again, like, this is one of the things that Blizzard has done really well with their UIs over the years, that they're very easy to pay attention to what's important on screen. And a lot of developers, again, will kind of miss those important cues. Like, why should, if I have my health, let's say health is red, then of course make the potions for healing red as well. And you have to be really careful when you kind of break those standards. Like we said, going back to the steering wheel example, that yes, you can make something different with, and I see that a lot of developers, they'll try to be like auteurs in that regard. Jump will be ESC, and F3 will be my shoot button. But if you're breaking things just to be different, or just for the sake of being unique, if it's not doing anything to help the player, then you're just making things confusing from the offset.
Right. I think even really good differential designs have trade-offs. Like, you look at gas cars versus electric cars, right? A Tesla. 300 miles on electric range. Most people don't drive that anywhere near in a day or a week.
Mm-hmm.
So if you drive out and you go to work and then you come back and you can run that on Tesla, right? That's fantastic. That's beautiful. It's better. It's cleaner for the environment. There are so many pros to the electric car, right? But what if you want to take a road trip? It gets more complicated than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, how long does it take to charge? Okay, well, it takes 30 minutes to an hour to charge the battery. You got to find the charging stations because there's not that many around, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to plan your route according to those things. You have to make sure you charge it every night. If you forget to charge it, at night, you can't just stop at a gas station.
Mm-hmm.
You're it's a trouble, right? So, like, even with what one could argue is a better technology, a better implementation, a beautiful car, there are still downsides and trade-offs to it, right? And I think a lot of people see things in black and white, like this is good and this is bad. I like this about this game, I hate this about this game, but it's not always that clear cut. Like it's too, because a lot of times in design you can get 80% of the feeling for like 10% of the work, if that makes sense. Like, and sometimes that's good enough, right? Because you're not just dealing with, can I make the best game I can make? It's, can I make the best game I can make by myself in 6 months with limited, with my limited art ability. It's not always what is the perfect thing. It's what's the perfect thing for me at this time to build. And sometimes there are trade-offs that are worth it. Like if I can get 80% of the way instead of 100, and it's not perfect, but it's good enough. But it takes me 10% of the time instead of that whole 2 months, it's going to take me 2 days. That might be the better decision, even though it's arguably a worse design on a cosmic scale. It may not actually matter in the end,
It's one of the things that I've said before, that sometimes you need to decide the difference between the game you want to make versus the game that you're able to make.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can... Philadelphia, there we go.
Yes, that's the sequel. It's going to be crazy. I'm moving there. I'm doing some research.
There we go. But yeah, it can be very tough to kind of have to make that choice between the two. Because again, a lot of developers are obviously very passionate about their games. Many people are fine with working 4, 5, 6 years on a single title if it's their dream game. But if you're just making things harder for yourself, then it's always going to end up being less than what you really wanted to be.
Yeah, man. Philophobia took me 4 years. And I wasn't working on it the whole time. Obviously, there were big time gaps in there because I'd get depressed or burnt out or whatever and stop for months. But I think I was so obsessed about making a good game. And I think what compounded it was the fact that I had this game dev YouTube channel, right? Like if I'm teaching people all this stuff that I learned about game dev and I make a shitty game, what does that say about me, right? Like, So there was like a lot of pressure, and I think on top of that, like I was so obsessed with this idea of I want to make a great game, but especially watching the playtest, it's so interesting because there are some people that hate my game so much. There's some people that bought it and they just hate it. They hate it, and there's nothing that I can do to make them like it, right? And then there are some people that speedrun it, and they do it over and over and over again. They play the same levels, and they memorize every jump and every piece of it. And seeing both of those exist simultaneously, like, I didn't make a good game. There's no such thing as a good game. There's a such thing as overlap between the thing I made and the compatibility with people, right? It's like a Venn diagram, and some games have a bigger circle and some games have a smaller circle, but the smaller circle is okay if it correlates more directly to that smaller audience, right? Niche audience is okay if it resonates more, right? So like that just taught me such a lesson, because for so much of development I obsessed over making a great game, and I just realized that it wasn't about making a great game, it's about making a good, like, something that resonates with a certain type of person, right? And that just kind of released me a little bit.
And again, like, I think that's one thing a lot of developers tend to get stuck on, is that I want to make a game just for me. But of course that game, you're going to like that game, but if it's just for you, how are you going to try and sell that game? How are people going to resonate with this title? And like
Yeah.
going back to what you said with Darkest Dungeon, like they were huge fans of role playing games, and that was one of the things that resonated with people. You know, fans of RPGs, fans of the old school dungeon crawlers,
Yeah.
and again, like this is one of the things I've said many times. Like the things that we talk about aren't these grand secrets hidden for like only members of a super exclusive club. They're just basic common sense. But to some people, it's like we're just explaining things like it's witchcraft to them.
Yeah. I think it's so crazy because I've been making I have a game dev channel for like 3 or I don't even know how long it's been now, years. But it seems like the more I learn about design, the less I know. The less I'm certain about it, because like there's so many rules that I thought like, okay, here's a design rule, and then I see a game just ignore that rule
Mm-hmm.
and just blow up, right? So like, is there? I think there are best practices, but I think like there's an old Picasso quote. I think it is. It's like, you got to know the rules before you can break them,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like once you understand the aesthetics of a painting, you understand shadows, you understand depth, you understand color,
Mm-hmm.
then you can do the crazy shit because you know what you're breaking, you know
Mm-hmm.
why you're doing it, right? You're intentionally breaking the mold, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's such different than like people making a platformer because they saw the documentary and now they want to make platformer 2 and they want
Yeah.
to make $1 million and make it a mobile game or whatever, you know, like just jumping on the train. It There's a learning curve to it, and design is one of those things that, one, it's not black and white, but two, it's also very empathetic. You have to
Mm-hmm.
understand people and understand things and be willing to change things and kind of take ego out of it,
Yeah.
right? Like as a
Mm-hmm.
creator of things for others, I think how they feel about it is more important than how I feel about it.
Yeah. I still remember the story a Yacht Club Games told me about. Like one of their friends was at a conference showing off their game, and they kept taking the controller out of the player's hand, saying, "You're not playing the game right. Let me show you how to do it." And it's like, yeah, that's not how you're going to be doing good playtesting on your game. And
My,
yeah,
I was gonna say I watched my girlfriend turn off her Nintendo Switch, turn it on, talk to Mewtwo to see if it's shiny, turn off Nintendo Switch, turn it on, do it over and over again, and that seems like the most boring possible way to play that game to get a shiny Mewtwo. But you know what? It keeps her going, and she's
mm,
just like all about that. You can't control how people are gonna play your game, and if they're
yeah,
playing it the wrong way all the time, maybe there's something there that you should
yeah.
follow, right?
Oh yeah, and this actually goes with a piece I just wrote about playability with mods. That there are so many mods that improve quality of life features for games that developers will either ignore or they may say that it hurts the experience of the game. But if everybody swears by this idea, then maybe it would be a good idea to include that in the game or make it official if everybody loves it. And
Yeah.
again, like you said, like sometimes you'll have an idea or something that will grow that nobody thought on the team that this was going to be the thing that people like. But again, you can't, exactly know how people are going to respond to a game or to a concept.
Yeah. There's a lot of things like that in my design because I stream most of my game development,
Mm-hmm.
so I have the benefit of getting that instant feedback. And there was a thing specifically in my new game, Cyberpunk. You're in a digital world, and there are these tiles, and there are these computer chips on the tiles because you're like in a computer. Um, and everybody would go up to the chips in the early version of the game, and they would try to move them or they would try to break them. Like just watching these playtests, everybody would do that, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I should let you move them or break them because everybody tries that.
Mm-hmm.
So then I did, and then everybody was like super into it. And everybody, I don't know what it is about breaking the chips, but people seem to find it fun. So then I was like, okay, what if we integrate that into the bigger part of the game? We made explodable chips, we made like freezable chips, and all these different ones that can be, uh, modified in different ways. And I think following that fun, right? Not like I didn't say, no, you're not supposed to break the chips. Stop trying to break the chips, people,
Mm-hmm.
right? But instead, I did the opposite. I followed that. Like, okay, what do
Mm-hmm.
people want to do intuitively in this thing? And I think I
Mm-hmm.
could separate my ego enough from the thing to say, okay, I want to create a thing these people like. So I'm going to change these things, even though I don't feel like that's the right option. I have proof in front of me that people seem to like that, so I follow that down. And honestly, the current build of the game, the entire game is moving and modifying chips. That's what the whole game is now, and that was all because I followed that whole theory down the drain.
Yeah. And I'm glad that we brought up again about why or how game design isn't black and white. That, something is bad in one game, so it must be bad in all games. Because this is one of the things that I talked about in my book on platforming, that everybody can make, everyone who wants to get into platforming thinks, oh, I just made my character press A, he jumps up, we're done. But there's a lot that goes into just that simple act of the feel of jumping. It's why people love games like Super Mario Brothers, Super Meat Boy, N, The N is Nigh, etc., and why they're playing platformers like the LGN franchise, although they're horrible games back in the day, why those platformers didn't work. And it's that feel. Just because one game does jumping badly doesn't mean all jumping is bad. It just means that implementation of it is. And I was saying this about like games like Monster Hunter, that I don't think there is such a thing as a truly a niche genre, something that is not going to be able to blow up. I think it all depends on how those elements are implemented. Like earlier this year, we got both Resident Evil. Oh no, last year we got Resident Evil 7, and then this year we got Resident Evil 2 remake. And people thought that survival horror was a dead genre, but it just really depends on how that's being presented.
Yeah. I think because running a marketing company, I tend to think in terms of marketing and tend to think in terms of like how appealing is this to people. And there are generally two kinds of marketing, right? There's attraction marketing, and then there's like exposure marketing. And I think there's people that, so for example, there are people that know they want a thing, and they're searching on Google for the thing right now, right? They're looking for it, and if you show up on top of that search, they're going to buy it. They want what you have. That's how Google has its monopoly in this whole thing, is because people use their thing to search, and they know what they want, and they're looking for it. But then there's another type of marketing where there's a thing that people don't know they want, right? They don't know that they want it yet. There's a game that would be perfect for them, but they're not searching for it because they don't know they want it. And I think good games can appeal to both, and that's where accessibility comes in, right? We could look at roguelikes. You could argue that actual pure core roguelikes are a niche genre because they're very specific, and people are very you've ever been to a roguelike subreddit, they are very particular about what a roguelike is and what it isn't.
Oh yeah,
say it wrong.
We've never had those discussions here on the Game Wisdom Discord, right, guys? We've never had that argument.
It's a particular type of audience, right? But then if you look at what's happened in the past 10 years with that whole roguelike thing, like, okay, let's take this element that I like of roguelikes and let's make a card game out of it. Let's make a space game out of it. Let's make a shooter game out of it, right? The thing that they like. Now, are those arguably roguelikes? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to state my opinion because I'm not getting involved in that conversation. But I think what's interesting about it is not that whether or not it confines to a definition, it's that it is an evolution of a thing. And I think people, they take these concepts that otherwise would be niche, right? Like some people say that ASCII graphics are needed to have a roguelike. But I hate ASCII graphics. I would never play a game with ASCII graphics. That makes no sense to me. Why you would stop a genre from, evolving and making it visually interesting and beautiful. But the second you do that, you take what would only appeal to a niche audience and you broaden it a little bit, right? Now you make that game more playable and accessible to other people. And I think that's been the kind of renaissance for these roguelites, or whatever you want to call them, in the recent years, is taking some of these core concepts that are very niche, but making them more accessible and opening them up and being a little more creative on different things to allow more people to play it,
Yeah, there's a roguelike actually called, I think, Cogmine, that was built entirely out of ASCII graphics, too. And that came out, I think, last year. And I think this is one of the things that's very hard to talk about when we talk about elements of playability and accessibility. That you can have a great game and it's not really a playable game or an accessible one. Just as you can
Yeah.
have a game that's very playable, very accessible, but may not be that great of a game, or the design may not be as great as you would think. And like we said, it's not always that black and white. Like, I played Celeste, and I've said this before, like, I think there are some major issues in terms of Celeste's design. And I don't think it's as playable as people think. It's very accessible, again, because of the assist mode and those kinds of things, but it's one of those things where I think a lot of people feel it's either one or the other. That it must be, if it's a great game, then surely it must be accessible. Or, no, it's not accessible, so therefore it's not a good game.
Yeah. But there are games on the opposite end of the spectrum too. Dwarf Fortress. I have heard so many people rave about
Oh,
Dwarf
yes.
Fortress and how amazing it is and how the crazy thing and the story, and they tell me the whole story. But I open up that game and I'm like, what is this? What am I looking at? You know? And that doesn't mean it's a bad game. It means it's not in my Venn diagram of compatible games, right? If you made a Dwarf Fortress, like you look at a game like RimWorld, right? It's still a little complicated. It's still a little convoluted to learn, but I think it takes interesting bits of like Dwarf Fortress and puts them in a space that's a little more accessible. That Venn diagram of people who play it is a little bigger, right? And that's what I'm saying when we say there's no like black and white. Like you can't say Dwarf Fortress is a better game than RimWorld. Say Fortnite is a better game than PUBG. That's not a real comparison. You can say I like this game better because, but you can't say it's better, you know?
Yeah. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who also goes by Josh, and we were talking about the Battle Royale genre. And I was saying about what I would like to see in a Battle Royale game. And he had a really good point there, that what happens, like, if you make your perfect example of a Battle Royale, like if let's say I can wave a magic wand and this is Josh's perfect Battle Royale game, would it still be a Battle Royale game? Like, would this still be a game that Battle Royale fans can enjoy? And that can be very tricky in terms, again, of what elements make up the genre, because there are genres which I don't like. Like, I'm not a huge stealth fan. I don't like simulator kind of games. And like you said, that doesn't mean they're bad games. They just don't fall within my group of games that I like. Like, for instance, in speaking about Battle Royale games, I played the game Hunt Showdown that came out a few months ago. And it's kind of like Battle Royale adjacent. And I really enjoyed that game. But would that still be considered a great example of a Battle Royale? I don't know, because I don't have enough experience in the genre for that to make those comparisons.
Yeah. That's another point to actually on our whole unique subject too, is like when you make the Darkest Dungeon, when you make the Cuphead, people are not comparing you. Oh, Cuphead's just like the previous version of Cuphead, right? When you make the clone of Cuphead, you always get compared to Cuphead. But when you make Cuphead, there's no. This game is not like the other games. This game is this game, right? The Darkest Dungeon was really different than a lot of games that I played before. It borrowed elements from here and there, but like it was a pretty unique experience. And I think a lot of people don't value that as much as I think they could. Not so much the unique experience, but you need enough familiarity to understand it and to kind of gauge what's going on, but then you also need enough uniqueness to be engaged and be interested from the get-go without just saying this is Darkest Dungeon but in space, right?
Yeah. And like going back to like FTL, for instance, again, a lot of people looked at FTL and said, I'm just going to copy that game, or I'm just going to copy similar elements of it. And again, like, it's a case of not really understanding what made FTL work. And I think there's also this habit, and I've said this before, for a lot of developers, even consumers, that when they look at a game that's popular, they ignore all criticism or all problems with it. And unfortunately, this is where you run into those cases of, I think FTL is a perfect game. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just going to make FTL but with pirate ships. And
Yeah.
it comes out being worse because not only did you fail to take what made FTL work and improved on it, but you also took the issues or complaints people had, and now they're even more apparent because you don't have that kind of buffer of FTL being a great game.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know what you would call it, but there's boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And when games do well financially, people tend to put them in the box of good games.
Yeah.
Like they tend to equate good sales with good games, right? Just naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is if you make a game similar to a good game or a financially successful game,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times you'll get compared to that game. My game got compared to Thomas Was Alone all the time, Philophobia, even though it
Mm-hmm.
was nothing like Thomas Was Alone. At one point, I had cubes in it, but Thomas Was Alone was the successful game with cubes in them. So at any point when I'm playing this game, you make a cube game, platform about a cube, you are Thomas Was Alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is. And I don't know if that was a reason I ended up changing the character. I think I just got better at art and I wanted to just, try my hand at it more. But it's interesting how that works. And so I think that's why that being a little bit unique and being aesthetically different is so important, because if a lot of people will just immediately write you off if you look like another one of those FTL clones or another one of those whatever.
Yeah.
Platformers are a huge example because there's so many of them, and so many of them look so similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a problem in game dev.
Yeah. And two examples, to quickly go over. I remember somebody, I think it was foreign users if he's watching this, who suggested the game Squirreltopia as a platformer for me to play. And again, from the outside, it looks like every other platformer ever made. But it had some really great level design, some really great challenges to it. But I think a lot of people, again, couldn't get past the fact that it looks like Super Meat Boy. So therefore, why should I play your game instead of that? And then to Justin's point that financial success is a good game, yeah, unfortunately, we've seen great games not get sales, just as horrible games or not that good games have gotten amazing sales. And if you want to
Yeah.
drive an indie developer crazy, just ask them what they thought of the game Goat Simulator, because that will drive a lot of them up a wall when they hear that game.
Uh, that's a great example, because I have no interest in playing that game, but that game did really, really well. If you the whole Farmville thing, if you would have asked me, okay, I'm going to put a game on a social network and it's going to be about growing crops and it's going to take forever. It's going to take you 2 weeks to grow a crop. And then we're going to pop up things in front of you and ask you to give us money. I'd be like, you're crazy. That's never going to work. But you know what? I don't know. I've been wrong before.
Again, Steam. Nobody thought this is going to force me to put all my games on. I need to have an internet connection, and I have to have an account. That's never going to catch on. And then I think a lot of us was wrong about Steam taking over back in 2004.
Oh yeah. I think there's a famous example. Like I use Dropbox. I've been a member of Dropbox for 8-9 years now. It's the only monthly subscription that I've never lapsed on, that I've never just quit and got rid of. And I remember reading some headline that Apple said that Apple tried to acquire Dropbox on the basis that it was a product, not a company, right? And they proved that wrong. They made that it technically, okay, you would think that it would make more sense as part of the Apple ecosystem, as part of the Windows ecosystem, whatever, but they took a product and they did a thing that nobody else thought was possible. Nobody really was even pay attention to that kind of stuff, and they made it work for everybody as its own standalone thing, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they focus on the wrong things. I don't think there's a possible and an impossible. I don't think there's a good or bad. I think there's varying degrees of compatibility with varying amounts of, right? And that's the challenge to solve when you're making something marketable.
Mm-hmm. And being able to explain to people again, like, what makes your game special. Why should I play this game? Because we can certainly look at, again, like the FTL clones, Darkest Dungeon clones, platformers, whatever, and the ones that stand out always will be able to say why they stand out. Like you said, like Thomas Was Alone would be a good example. Yes, it looks like a platformer, but you can look at like 20 seconds of that game and realize, yeah, this is not a Mario game or a Super Meat
Right.
Boy game.
Even Thomas Was Alone though, you look at people, and it actually bothers me that people like kind of use Thomas Was Alone as like the jab of like, oh well, Thomas Was Alone used cubes, you can use cubes too. You're like, make no, but okay, they're not understanding all the subtleties in that game though. One, it's a very aesthetically beautiful cube game. Okay, it's a cube game, but it is very beautiful. The color choices, the shadows, the level design, all of those systems are built beautifully. On top of that, the narration is top notch. The voiceover just brings that game to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, rather than just say they take a thing like cubes and say, okay, well, this game was successful and it had cubes, so you can make cubes. And Thomas Was Alone did it, you could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the lesson, man. It's not like the lesson was that this guy took his limited art ability and made something aesthetically pleasing and beautiful and played to his strengths
Mm-hmm.
to build something that was compatible with a large amount of people. That's the lesson. It's like, what are your strengths, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're an artist, you can maybe make an art heavy game, and that's your strong suit. If you're a programmer, you can make a systems heavy game, right? Like RimWorld, for example, there's I don't even think there's any animation in like the little characters. None. There's no animation in the characters. If you were to say, I'm going to make a game with no bunch of characters but no animation in the characters, you'd be like, but those are the strong suits of the people that create it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important.
Yeah, you need to figure out what your core gameplay loop is. You need to figure out what is going to convince somebody to play this game.
Yeah.
And like you said, like there are developers who can do everything. They can have amazing art, amazing programming, a great gameplay loop. But if you don't have that, then you need to figure out how to get around it. Like we said again, the game you want to make versus the game that you can make. If it's better to, not purposely have a bad element in your game, because you thought you were competing with somebody, then it's just to take that out. If you're not good at making animations, or let's say you have bad art, then figure out a way to get around that. Don't try and copy somebody else's style, thinking that it's going to help your game if you can't do that better.
In Phallophobia, every single enemy is either a heart shape or it's made out of heart shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And that constraint was 100% depending on my inability to make art. Because I was just like, you know what? There's a default heart shape in Photoshop. That's what I'm going to use. And it evolved. I made crazy things out of hearts. Like, I made a giant snake out of hearts. I made this spider out of hearts. Like, it's crazy. But it's a constraint that I had because I knew my art ability, and I've improved quite a bit, I think. I'm pretty proud of my art these days. But like when I was working on the game, like art was my weak point, but I needed to make this art for this game. And as a result, like, I actually think that's a strong point of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Phallophobia is a game where love is literal hell and made out of hearts. Like, that says something. And that was a part of me that I put into it and I played to my strengths. Yep. Versus saying, oh, I need this photorealistic.
You need to use the Unreal Engine 4 kind of thing.
I need, exactly, like, oh, this is a demon. How do I make it look like a demon? I need some bump maps and all kinds of stuff. No, it's very simple. It's flat. It's what I could do, basically. And it turned out to be one of the strong points. And like with Darkest Dungeon, for example, I'm convinced that game could have been a platformer, that game could have been a shooter, whatever, but you put the same level of art and aesthetic beauty, you put the same level of voiceover, you put the same level of world building in it, it really wouldn't have mattered. Like, there's a lot of stuff in there, and if you can identify it, it's that unique, it's that aesthetically pleasing, it's that interesting to people. Those are the strengths of it. And a game, I think, lives or dies by its strengths, just like a book does, just like a movie does, right? Like, not all movies are all the same. There's a lot of similar plot lines, but people like movies for different reasons, and I think it's important to understand that.
And again, like Darkest Dungeon, from that aesthetics and presentation point of view, it does so much to pull the player in, and that's another area where a lot of developers tend to mess up on. They'll do this Darkest Dungeon look, and then you just watch, like a very basic animation. There's like no sense of movement. There's no narration, and again, it's that case of, yes, I'm trying to copy Darkest Dungeon, but not really realizing why Darkest Dungeon worked.
Yeah. You're copying the thing, not the reason, the underlying exactly, because if you understood what made it work, I think you'd focus on, at least from my understanding, and my understanding is flawed. I'm not a perfect designer, but from what I understand, like I think the lesson from Darkest Dungeon, or the lesson from Cuphead, or all these different places, is that you want to make something appealing and aesthetically pleasing and unique enough to draw people in, to not get confused with other people's things, and put enough of yourself in the game that it, nobody can copy it. Like, somebody asked me one time, they were like, Tim, you're streaming this game every day. You have this unique shadow mechanic. What if I just copy that and I made a similar game to yours? And I was like, I don't care. You can copy everything in this game. You can copy all the shadows. You can copy all the enemies. You can copy that. But you can't take me out of it.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many pieces of me in that game. I have an obsession with skulls. I don't know why, but there are skulls made out of hearts. There's all kinds of like little pieces. I had hundreds of people from all over the world fill out a form on my YouTube channel with names of people that had broken their hearts or had broken hearts, and those names are integrated into the game in a hellish, weird world. Like, there's so many pieces of me in that. You can try and copy it all. You'll never get the soul of what made it. You can come up with a similar aesthetic, but you're missing the point there. The point there is that I went all my direction, and I made my thing the way I wanted to make it. And if you're always trying to make my thing, you're always right behind me.
Yeah. Again, that just fits every big name game, and then the ones that follow it after. If you're trying to compete, and I think Draken or somebody mentioned World of Warcraft earlier. Everybody tried to copy World of Warcraft instead of trying to go in a different direction. And you're never going to out World of Warcraft, because they're never going to stop making it. And you have to either do something, you have to figure out can you say something differently? Because if all you can say is, I'm just going to make the same thing as World of Warcraft, you're never going to succeed like that.
Yeah. I wish more people understood their value as humans. That sounds weird, but like, they really don't. Like, so many people just place this value externally. They think that thing is the reason why it's successful or whatever, but they don't realize that what makes them unique and what makes them different isn't a weakness. And for a long time, I thought it was a weakness. Like, I'm not like those other people. I don't go to GDC. I don't go to these events. I don't meet hundreds of people. I'm not very social. I don't have the, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not like them. Those popular people that are winning awards and stuff for their games, right? I'm me. But what I didn't realize is that there was an extreme value in me that other people don't have, right? It's the same reason why, like, I think I gravitated to YouTube so well, because I didn't realize that, like, I had this strength in talking about subjects that other people sometimes don't have, right? Like, or I have this obsession with skulls, even weird obsession with skulls that I integrate in all of my stuff, but that makes it me. And people don't realize what makes them sometimes. A lot of times they don't know, but a lot of times, even if they do know, they don't value it properly. And I think it's really important. And maybe that's a self-esteem thing, maybe that's a mental health thing, but I wish more developers would realize their value, Yeah.
And it is very tough when you're trying to design games like this, because, like we said, like, this is a very passionate field, and you have to, again, be able to balance between, I'm doing this just for me, like, it's my personal project, versus I want people to experience this alongside of me. And like, that kind of is like one of the cornerstones about playability. that it's easy for you to figure this out because you made this game. Why is this confusing? I'm the one who built it. But like going back to your chip example earlier, that people play the game and they, from their point of view, they had that level of understanding of and trying to relay it along those lines. And again, sometimes you have to cater or you have to understand what people are looking at versus what you want to make. And it is tough, I think, for people to understand that because there's always that risk of I'm just going to cater to everybody, or the second somebody makes a comment, I'm going to add that to my game.
Right.
Should we add 5 more levels? Let's make 5 more levels. You guys suggest a new enemy? Let's add that in. And there's always that give and take of, I'm trying to make a product to sell versus I'm still trying to make something that is personal and special to me.
Yeah. You know what's so funny is I literally lived that the past year. Because Philophobia was such a personal project to me. I didn't care what anybody said. I was just like, you know what? I don't care what you guys have to say. This game, I'm going to make this game exactly the way I want to make. And then with Cyberpunk, I wanted to make a game that other people would enjoy. So I listened to everybody. I would be streaming it and people would give me ideas and I would do those ideas. And I went too far with it, right? I think Philophobia could have benefited a little bit from a little bit of external feedback. And I think Cyberpunk went too far with listening to people, and I changed a bunch of stuff and I broke a bunch of stuff, and I made this convoluted mess of 30 people's ideas, right? When I should have stuck to my guns and made it a little more specific. And I think that is it's a fine line. And that's why I say I wish people valued themselves more, because and we talked about why, right? Why in a video game, why you're making a video game is just as important too, because if you only want to learn something, what you're going to make is going to be completely different than if you only want to make something people love, right? Learning, you're going to take all these big technical complex challenges and you're not going to worry so much about design. You're going to do all this stuff and this stuff that maybe doesn't make a good game. But if you want to make something people love, or you want to make something even commercially successful, you may make different decisions.
Yep.
And so understanding why you're doing something, I think, is more important than even understanding what you're doing, because the why can give you those opportunities to make unilateral decisions, right? Decisions that you otherwise wouldn't make, right? And it would help you determine real problems. Like, why am I making it? Okay, well, I want to make a commercial game. I want to make a living making games, for example. Okay, well, then what kind of game are you going to make, right? A platformer might be easy to make, but is that going to be the best chance of commercial success? Is that the best option, right? You're going to make different options. You may love platform, but I think people should just understand their why more than anything.
Yeah. And getting to board fans' comment, developer, in his opinion, create a game which is not just a game they are passionate about and for them, but also which is marketable. I think one of the challenges of that is that sometimes those two are kind of mutually exclusive. Sometimes a game may be incredibly personal and passionate, it may not be the most marketable game. Just as you may want to make a game that's very marketable, but it may feel derivative, or people may look at it as just like another soulless cash grab. Again, going back to the Enchanted Portals example, there are people who the second they saw that kind of aesthetic, they thought, this is a rip-off, screw it, developers are evil, they're out to get Cuphead, and all that. And it's very hard to find that middle ground. Yep, just as Board Fan was saying that. And I said in my video that if I were the Enchanted Portals developer, I would look for as many ways that they can tweak that so that people don't automatically assume it's Cuphead. Either maybe changing the aesthetic, maybe changing some of the animations or characters, just anything that you can do, like we said earlier, that you can find that unique voice in your game.
Yeah, I think having multiple reasons why, they said, a game you're passionate about, but also a game marketable, I think that's a very delicate balance to achieve, and we talked about that. But I think part of the problem with that is those two objectives can have competing goals, right? I'm making a hacking game. It's about the whole idea of that power fantasy of one person in their bedroom taking down a mega corporation that's evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool concept. But if I'm going to make the thing I'm passionate about, sometimes that can get in the way of what's marketable.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to make a game that's marketable, sometimes that can remove me from some stuff that I'm passionate about, right? You know what I'm not passionate about? Menus.
Mm-hmm.
Menus and all kinds of settings menus and all kinds of stuff like that, right? But that makes the game more accessible. That makes the game easier to understand. That's important. I'm not passionate about tutorials either, but it's important part of the game. And I think for me personally, I can't say how other people should do their stuff, but for me personally, I find that like having a pillar that grounds me in my design, like writing down the why am I making, writing down the constraints, writing down the solid concepts that are like locking stuff in,
Mm-hmm.
I think is really important, because then what I can do is every time I come up with an idea, I say, does that match this pillar? Does that make this game whatever? Is it, and it's a yes or no question every time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it makes it like, especially with all the stuff I went through with Cyberpunk, listening to, and I love my stream, don't get me wrong, but like I took a lot of ideas that weren't compatible with what I wanted to make, and I think the only reason I did that is because I didn't know what I wanted to make, right?
Yeah.
Ironing out specifically what the thing is and why you're making it is important, because then you have that grounding pillar,
Yeah.
and you have a measuring tool for all the ideas that come along, and you can say whether they're compatible.
Yeah. And that's the core gameplay loop of a title in a nutshell. And that's the very first thing you need to figure out as a developer. If you don't know why people are going to want to play your game, you shouldn't be spending 10 months, 2 years, whatever, trying to come up with that answer. Because everything that you do alongside of that is essentially null and void. If you design elements for your game that don't fit your core gameplay loop, you're going to have to get rid of that. And that is time and energy wasted. And
Yeah.
I spoke with Chris Park from Arkham Games about this in the past. Like, he's made some very deep, very complicated games. AI Wars, what was it, The Last Federation, and other ones. They're all very dense titles in terms of their design. And the thing that he said was how he built it was always going back to what is the core gameplay loop, what is required or essential for that, and those are the first things that he builds. Anything that's ancillary to the core gameplay loop will either A, not be included in the game, we can't get it to work, or B, he'll say that for an expansion or a DLC. But once that core gameplay loop is set, he's not touching that. If he's building, let's say, if you're building I don't know, a city builder around, I don't know, horse ranching, let's go with that, then you're not going to add in a first-person shooter segment. You're not going to add anything that's going to distract or get away from it. Because it's better to build a cohesive idea than to try and build 20, 30 separate games and then stitch them all together.
Yeah. I think people don't realize that you can make a game, like a lot of people think that you can make a game better by adding things to it, but a lot of people don't realize that you can make a game better by taking things away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have two competing ideas or two competing concepts, it muddies them both down.
Yep.
Right? It makes them both worse because they're both competing for your attention, they're competing for compatibility, they're competing for depth, they're competing for all kinds of stuff. And on top of that, you know, you're dedicating dev time to each one of those ideas.
Yep.
But let's say you strip out the half that, you know, just strip out half of it and you focus on one core thing. You can make that so much more powerful, and powerful in a lot of ways, mechanically, but also powerful in focus. You can make it easier to teach. You can make it easier to understand. And it's been interesting with like Cyberpunk, especially because a lot of the last month or two of dev time has been cutting stuff out. I spent a bunch of months adding stuff in, but I'm literally going through just cutting stuff out. And I'm finding that every time I cut something out, even though I'm attached to it, even though I want it in there because it's so cool, but I take it out and suddenly, whoa, this game is clearer, right? It's more interesting.
Yep, a problem that was really big may not be that big of a deal anymore. And yeah, like, I'm trying to think of some good examples off the top of my head there, but for a lot of developers, they'll assume that, like you said, Just add more, and surely the game will be better. If it's a 10-level game and I add in 10 more levels, that's double. That the game will get double the sales and double the reviews.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't work like that. And I was thinking about this with games with the XCOM model. XCOM is a good example of multi-system design. It is essentially 3 different systems combined into one thing. And a lot of people think that it's easy to do like that. No, it's very hard. That you have a tactical layer, you have a real-time, you have the geoscape layer, you have the base building layer. Getting
Yeah.
all that to work in sync in one gameplay loop is incredibly hard. Like the closest example would be something like the Total War franchise. Like they've also deal with multiple systems or multiple loops, and that is very hard to teach and it's very hard to design.
Totally. I had in Cyberpunk, I have a net map which shows you the network of computers, and then you click on a computer, and then you go into the actual game loop, which is like you're inside the computer and playing.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, the net map had all these icons on it. When you click on a computer, it showed the IP address, it showed the which was the seed of the game, it showed what kind of resources were on the map, whether there was health there, whether there was a power up there. And then I played Slay the Spire, and I looked at their net map, and I was like, there's literally like no information on this map. It's like one thing. It's like
Treasure
and it's
chest,
so much clearer.
enemy, this,
Yeah, it's the enemy, it's a chest, it's whatever. And I was just like, oh my god. Like, and I noticed in playtests too that like people were like, I don't know what any of this means, and they were doing the same thing that I did in Darkest Dungeon. Is like,
yeah,
there's way too much information, and that makes all of the information, even though technically you can make an argument that more information is better for a tactical choice, that much information on the map makes all of the choices harder to understand and harder to make, because there's no direct relationship between any of those things. So I stripped it all out, and I made it Slay the Spire style, and then suddenly everybody was like, oh my god, this is so much better, even though it's technically I took some depth out, if you think about it. But I think they're like design like anything else. There's a trade-off, and when you remove some of that, you gain some accessibility, you gain some learnability, you gain some understandability, and sometimes that's the right choice to make, you know?
Yeah. And yeah, like it reminds you a lot of the game Nota, NOITA, that I just played on stream a few weeks ago. I think for our last Indie Spotlight, that it's a roguelike that they give you a lot of information when you pick up like a new weapon, but really only two of like the 7 variables that they show are what's important to what you need to know.
Right.
And again, it's all about drilling down. What exactly do I need to know? Why do I need to know this? Again, like Slay the Spire. Why is there an icon with treasure chest? Because that's a treasure room. I don't need to know, what kind of treasure it's going to be or the percent chance. Just, it's a treasure room. This is a monster room. Make your choice.
Yeah. And what people don't get, I think, a lot of times is that choice is still valid. Like you can make choices that sometimes people, I don't know how to say this. I'm trying to think of a way to frame this.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can give the illusion of depth by giving an arbitrary choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think about Slay the Spire, the map choices are not super important. Like, yeah, maybe you get extra treasure chests here or there. They're not very even important. But if that part of the game was stripped out, the game would feel weird. It would feel repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
It would feel, like, okay, but I'm just doing this over and over again. And it's kind of, even though I don't think there's a whole lot of depth to that map,
Mm-hmm.
it really adds and complements the gameplay so well. And it's just enough to be engaging and be interesting.
Yeah.
And that's a delicate balance, man, because easily if they would have doubled the amount of information on that map, it would have been like, whoa, what is all this? If there would have been no information on the map, there would be no point to it at all.
Yep.
Right? So figuring that out, I think, is part of the whole design kerfuffle that most designers fall into.
Yep. And as you said earlier, that if you can do something 80% of the way and add so much to your game, then that can be a huge improvement. Like Slay the Spire being a great example. They, as you said, they could have done so much more to the map system of that game. Maybe you could have gone into different maps. Maybe we could change the map around. But would that have really affected the core gameplay loop? No, because the core gameplay loop is the deck building combat. Everything has to flow or has to be involved with that, or it's just add fluff.
Right. And with that map, if they had added more information, for example, the expert players might have loved it, but every new player to the game might have felt overwhelmed and not played it, right? And that could have actually decreased. They could have made a better tactical game, but had worse sales, right? Yeah. Like those things aren't correlated. If you make a 90% perfect game, you don't get 90% more sales, right? That's not how it works. It's a weird. There's so many design implications that are directly tied to psychology and onboarding and interesting things. And when you realize the fact of the matter that 90% of the players are not going to make it through the first hour of your game, I think you start to look at things a little bit differently.
Yeah. It's something I spoke with my friend Ramin about, that we've talked about that game design in a lot of ways is about player psychology. And a lot of people, for obvious reasons, don't have a psychology background. And it is very different when you start looking at how people approach your game versus, again, just what am I trying to make? And again, with the Slay the Spire example, that, as we said earlier, a deep or a complicated game is not necessarily always going to be a better game. And again, like, this is one of those very weird points. I think it's another thing a lot of people tend to mess up on, or they tend to have trouble with. That just because you really like a game where you and your 10 friends doesn't mean that's going to be a mass-marketed game, or it's going to be a hugely popular one. The game, and I've said this before about games that try to become critical darlings, but end up being commercial failures. Tales like Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, Sky Shines Bedlam, and even for a time, Brigador. I almost forgot that game. That all three of those games had very rabid fans. They had a small, tightly knit group of people who wanted that game to succeed. They found nothing wrong with that game. There was no issues with it. When each one of those games came out, they were hit by tons of negative feedback from the mainstream and consumer market. Issues that anyone who studies design would have been able to spot within 5 minutes of playing those games. And again, there's that issue of, even though you may have a tightly knit or tightly wound fan base, that's not the same as a mass market success. A good example would be, I don't know if you heard the La Mulana franchise.
No.
That is basically Metroidvania platformer taken to the absolute highest. These are they're incredibly challenging games, puzzle filled. They're designed in a way that you are going to be exploring them for like weeks and months to try and figure out how things work. And they are horrible when it comes to trying to teach a new player. And there are things that are confusing in those games just for the sake of being confusing.
Yeah.
And their fans will defend those choices to the death. And I know this because when I wrote my negative review of La Mulana, they came at me saying, "You're horrible at games. You don't play platformers. You don't know any Dark Souls style games." Oh no, that was Let It Die, because I said bad things about that one.
What? Or the developers?
The audience, the fans.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say that.
Yeah,
doesn't sound professional.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, Let It Die was another example. That there are people who say, "You're not good at Dark Souls games because you said bad things about Let It Die." And then I said, "I've platinum Bloodborne. I've beaten every Dark Souls." No, that doesn't matter. And again, just because you like an idea or because it's amazing to you, doesn't mean that's going to be a mass marketed success. Sometimes it does end up like that. Again, FTL is a hard game. It is a very niche kind of design, but it still blew up in a lot of ways.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting to me is I do a thing called Feedback Friday, the first Friday of every month, where I play viewers' games live on stream and I'll give them feedback. And occasionally we'll get a developer, plays my game, and they'll say things exactly like you're saying. Oh, like, I won't get it, right? I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I don't know what I'm doing. And they're like, well, you don't play these kind of games, or you would get it. And then they'll tell me things like that. And then they'll say things like, no, you go here, go do this. And I'm like, listen, me not knowing what to do is feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That's this. I can't give you the feedback from the perspective of someone that knows your game. I can
Exactly.
only give you the perspective of me, right? Like, and I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. I'm
Mm-hmm.
lost. I'm not engaged, and that's the feedback. Like,
Yep.
take that, and you either integrate that or you don't. You either want me to like your game, or you
Mm-hmm.
don't, and either one of those is fine.
Yeah.
But it's just the feedback. People need to. I think sometimes games are so personal
Exactly.
that we like. I've done this too with Photophobia. I was just when people didn't like it, it was like they didn't like
Mm-hmm.
me, and that gave me like this
Yep.
anxiety and hard feeling. Right? People
Oh,
need to separate themselves from their projects a little bit. I think
exactly.
otherwise they can, really go down a deep, dark mental space.
Yeah. And what you just said there about the designer saying you're playing it wrong, that is how you don't conduct player play testing and player feedback.
Yeah,
Because you need people who have never played your game, just as you need expert players. And
yeah,
while yes, you can't quote unquote dumb your game completely down, you need to be able to understand why are people not understanding your game. What are the pain points in your design? Because those are elements that I think they still annoy expert players, but they're already so involved, so integrated in the game that it doesn't bother them. Like for myself, I have like some of my appliances in my house are like old and they don't work 100%. I've gotten used to that, but that still means that yes, it would be nice to get a brand new heater or get a brand new oven. But again, you have to be able to, as you said, you have to be able to accept feedback and you have to be able to parse it as well. For my
yeah,
fans, we've had our podcast with John Brieger, who does a lot with playtesting. And we've said this many times. Saying that your game is perfect is just as helpful as saying this game sucks, it's horrible. It's not telling you anything.
yeah. I agree. I think there is a fundamental design flaw in my game, Photophobia.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've seen screenshots of it or like how it works.
No, not
Uh,
yet.
so it's got this shadow mechanic that basically covers everything outside of line of sight,
Okay.
and it's a precision platformer. And I actually think design wise, those two things compete with each other. That makes like it would have made more sense if I made that game Mania or some kind of game that's more about searching than precision platforming, right? Because that shadows and covering objects makes more sense when you're trying to find things, not when you're trying to land on a platform.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but that being said, I design wise, if I were to see that game from somebody else, I would think that's a fundamental flaw. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, that fundamental flaw is the exact reason that a lot like it, and I never anticipated that. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was crazy to me that like I could literally think of this thing as a problem with my game
Mm-hmm.
that other people cherish because of it,
Yeah.
and it's
You never know sometimes what people are going to resonate to with your design.
yeah,
And sometimes that requires you to pivot. And like we said, that can be very hard for developers to know that if I like X, but 80% of the people who play my game hate X, I may have to, cut something that I don't want to do. But
yeah,
like we said, it's that always that balance between, marketing or making a product versus making something 100% for the art.
right. And that why is so important
Yep.
because if people hate it, but your why is personal, who cares what people think? Make your thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? They can, whatever. But if you want them to like it, and that's your why, you've got a problem there. You've got a problem you have to address,
Yep.
right? You definitely got to do something about that. And I think that's why competing wise can kind of get in the way because
Mm-hmm.
you end up with a convoluted message of what the game is.
Yeah. And as a quick time check, we are over 2 hours in the stream. It feels like we just got started like
I know.
20 minutes ago. Um, I guess how do you feel in terms of time? Do you want to begin to wrap things up, keep going, start to what do you feel like?
I'm good for another half hour if you are
Okay.
probably.
All right. I think we were going to do a recording. I think maybe we'll say that for another day then because it is going to be getting a little bit late here. But again, I'm free all next week and whatnot. And we've been talking about doing like a game design roundtable cast. If you're ever interested in coming on for that too, Tim.
What does that consist of?
Where we'll be basically have a bunch of developers and people want to talk about game design topics as a group instead of just being a one-on-one interview.
That sounds cool. I'm always down for design. I realized that on my channel I don't talk a lot about game design, at least not. It's more about the physical struggles because I always
Mm-hmm.
my problem was never the technical side of games. It was always like, how do you finish a project? How do
Mm-hmm.
you get the motivation to do that stuff? And that's kind of what I focused on. But recently, after making dozens of games, after building all these prototypes, after joining all these game jams, after doing all this stuff, I start to notice things. And then I'm like, okay, well, design wise, if I do this thing, it resonates with more people, and so on and so forth. And I started realizing the whole how powerful design actually is, because a lot of, we call them indie developers. They're developers, they're coders, they're artists, but design I think is an underappreciated subject. I don't get to
Mm-hmm.
talk about it a lot. It's one of those things that I think is growing in importance over time.
Yep. And I said this at a presentation I just gave a few days ago that the respect or the understanding of design, I think that is slowly becoming more important in terms of education and in terms of game design. Because again, a lot of people didn't think video games were going to go anywhere. A lot of them still view it as, dumb toys for your kids. And I think some of that is also in the academia as well as among other developers. Like, why should I learn about good game design practices if I just want to make a game for me? And again, a lot of people will look at the success of a game but not understand why it succeeded. They,
Yeah.
again, like Darkest Dungeon, they think these developers were passionate about a dungeon crawling Lovecraftian game, so surely that's why it succeeded. No, they succeed because they understood what they wanted to make and they kept to that core vision.
Yeah.
And it's hard, I think, like we said, for a lot of people to understand what goes on behind the scenes. And that is not only just for design, that's for marketing, PR, you name it. You can only experience something from your own point of view. So if you're sitting there watching, again, like something like Untitled Goose Game, and thinking, oh, that game succeeded because it's a meme-worthy title. Well, that could have been part of it, but again, there's more to that success than just looking at memes on Twitter.
Yeah. There's a lot of luck involved too.
Oh, yes.
I hate to say that as somebody that marketed products for years, but like there's one thing I could never do in marketing. Guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
And people would come to me and be like, I need a guaranteed X sales if we hire you. Well, I don't know what to tell you because
Yeah.
I can try my best to sell your stuff in every way that I know possible, but
It's,
there's always an X factor,
Mhm.
like people are going to resonate with it or not. And there are things you can do. There are ways that you can describe the product. There are
Yeah.
images that show the product that can be better or worse objectively, right?
Mhm.
Like you can change a trailer on a Steam page and have your conversion go from 2% to 4%, right?
Mhm.
Like, and that's just numerically better, right?
Yeah.
So you can prove that it's better. But there are things that you have no idea about. Like that one
Mhm.
guy that covered your game on YouTube and got 10,000 views, but those 10,000 views opposed to Markiplier's 1.2 million, those 10,000 were hardcore strategy fans, and you made a strategy game, right?
Mhm.
But both of them went up at the same time. You have no idea which one the sales are coming from.
Yeah, and again, like most people think, oh, Markiplier covered his game, that's why it succeeded. That's why he did so well.
Yeah.
But again, that's not always the case. And yeah, that's one thing that we've said many times. You can do things wrong and succeed, just as you can do everything right and your game still fails. And like you said, there's
Yeah.
always that X factor involved with these.
There's a great Star Trek quote I think it is where Captain Picard was like, "It's possible to make all of the right decisions and still fail."
Yep.
Right? And people, they're looking for the tips. They want the mistakes. They want the easy way. They want the hack. They want the 7 quick tips on how to make a successful indie game, and those just They're not real. They don't exist.
I said that at my presentation. I said that what we're not covering is how to make a video game and how to make a successful video game. Because if I knew the answers to that, I wouldn't be here right now. I would be basically touring around the world giving lectures at every college. Because there is no such thing.
You know what's crazy though is like even people with successful games a lot of times have no clue why their game was successful. They they have no clue. And they some of them think they do, some of them don't. But it's this whole survivorship bias thing is especially bad in our industry, where we don't see all the failures, so we take advice of the people that are successful. But the problem is, what if they don't know why they were successful?
Yep.
Right. I think I've had people in my Discord and stuff. Well, I've had comments like on my channel like, Tim, how are you going to make a game about game dev if you never had a successful game? One, what does success mean? But two, like, are you saying that because I've never made $1 million, that everything I have to say is just worthless? That all of the mistakes that I've made, all the dozens of games of things that I've learned, all the books that I've read, all this knowledge that I've acquired over my 30-some years of life, right? It's just irrelevant because I haven't made $1 million in game. And the second I do make $1 million in a game, then suddenly then you will listen to me. But then what if everything that I said before contributed to that? Or what if it was completely different? Like, people, I wish, like I said, I wish people would value themselves more and realize it that, and this sounds so cheesy. I know, like, guys, the secret's in your heart. Okay.
It was in us all along. The real game design is in us all along. There we go.
But like, for real, man, like if you're following someone else's path, you're always behind them.
Yeah.
And you've got to do things. You've got to, like, you have to pay attention to what works, right? This whole scientific method of like, do a thing, test the hypothesis, right? My hypothesis is when I click this button, I get more sales. And then you test the result. Did I get more sales? Yes or no? If yes, continue to push the button, right? And if no, go back to the drawing board, try this other button. That's important. And if you have that mindset, I think you collectively get worse. But I think there are other ways to achieve your goals. Like one of the things I'm doing right now, Philophobia took me 4 years. I hate to say that because like 4 years for a platformer, and I made like, that game made close to 10 grand, right? That's enough to make me homeless. Let's put it that way. We do the math. But one of the things I'm doing is like, okay, I can try to make more money off the game, right? Or I could spend less time making a game, right? I could optimize my time. I could do it. One of the things I'm doing with my Cyberpunk game is it's a 1,000-hour experiment, right? 1,000 hours is my limit for Cyberpunk. That's what I'm trying to do, which works out to about 6 months of dev time if you're going at it full time. That reduces the amount of money that I have to make to be profitable. And it's a different perspective. It's a creative constraint, but it's also a perspective on game design that I think a lot of people ignore. They're like, how do I make $1 million? But that's the wrong question. We talked about identifying problems, right? Like sometimes the right problem is, how do I make the game profitable? Not how do I make more money? How do I make the game profitable? And sometimes you can do that by reducing your risks, reducing your costs. And
that's something that Jeff Vogt from SpiderWeb Software has talked about many times. He's, of course, the developer behind, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on his games. Gene Forge, Arcanum, no, not Arcanum. Oh, God. What was the game that he just came out? Queen's Wish, The Conqueror? But his niche has always been classic CRPG design. You know, the old school, you know, Baldur's Gate isometric RPGs. And he does everything to keep those costs down. And people complain, why don't you have, you know, fully animated characters? Because that costs a lot of money. Why don't you have expansive art? Because that's more money as well. He wants to make a solid CRPG, and that's what he makes. So that even if his game doesn't sell well compared to other games, it can still earn him enough money to make a living off of. And again, like what you said about making a game that's profitable, a lot of people don't think about that. They think again about, I want my game to be number one, you know, top game of the year. Everybody plays it. I make $10 million. That's my goal. Okay, how are you getting to that goal exactly? Oh, I'll just spend 10 years working on this game. No, that's not how it's going to work.
Stardew Valley guy did it.
Of
what are you
course.
talking about? He did it. I could do it.
Yeah, I can make the next Undertale. I'm good at music. I'll make Undertale in 2 weeks, and I'll be a millionaire.
Yeah. It was the whole. It's crazy how many get rich quick people came in after like the whole Flappy Bird thing too, especially because I did freelancing a lot for I would make games for hire, and I would literally get requests all the time. How much for a Flappy Bird clone? That would be like the whole email. And I'd be like, "Are you really like that's?" It's, I think that why we keep going back to why, but it's so much clearer when you just figure out, okay, why am I doing this? Like, for example, I've recorded every hour that I've worked on Cyberpunk in a spreadsheet, and I have graphs and everything. And my goal, like, it's 1,000 hours, right? That works out to 6 months full time. My monthly burn is a little over $2,000 a month. I do the math. If I spend 6 months on a game, that means profitable, right? Mathematically, that game is going to make me more than I spend past $12,000 point. A lot of people don't have that data on their stuff, and the problem is they're entering a business and they're treating it like it's a technical hobby, right? If your why is I want to make a commercial game, and that's not a why, but if that's what you want to do, you're going to have to treat it like a business. And what does a business do? It tracks its employees' hours. It understands profit margins, right? It understands how much it needs to be profitable. And a lot of businesses lose a lot of money before they make it, right? They lose a lot. Startups only exist because of giant investment stuff. Like Lyft and Uber still don't make money. And they've been around for how long? They're losing money every month.
And like me with like my presentation stuff on YouTube, like I'm still not earning enough money right now. I'm still growing and keeping things going. And a lot of it is again trying to, hit that laser focus of what you want to do and can you make a living off of it. I would like to say I'm getting closer. I think, again, I am nowhere near the end of calling around to these libraries and reaching out, through academia. And I think when I get to the end, it's going to be at least a success for me. Is it going to be, $15-20 million a year? Hell no, that's not going to happen. But it will be a success, at least for me, in terms of being able to keep doing what I'm doing. And a lot of people, I think, have that problem, that they look at success as it's going to be a 30 million copies best-selling game. Sometimes success is just literally having enough money that you have $1 in your bank account at the end. And
I think a lot of people make the mistake of not defining what success means. They don't know what it means. Like Tim, like people said that before. Philophobia wasn't that successful. Why do you talk? Okay, my goal was 10K year one. That was my goal. I want to make $10,000 in year one. I did that. Does that make it successful? Yes, because I predetermined that. It's successful to me. Boom. Did it make $1 million? No. But when the people say, I want to make a successful game, they don't determine what that means. Exactly what does that mean? What timeline? What amount? What do you want out of it? And that's a life lesson too, I think. I learned that from like Think and Grow Rich and all these self-improvement books I used to read. Like determining the problem before you can solve it design wise. I think you have to determine what you want before you can get it in life,
Yep. And like we said, like a lot of developers only look at success as boom or bust. If this game didn't sell, 3 million copies, it's obviously a failure. And we've seen this in the AAA space many times from EA, who have killed franchises because even though it was successful, it was popular, it wasn't successful to them. And as Neil said in chat, I think that's a perfect point. And that was when I brought up in my presentation. The people who tend to succeed have failed many times over, but they're able to keep going. If you can fail like 5 times a year with your games and you're still learning, you're still able to do it, that is much better than spending 5 years on one game, failing, and then you're out of the industry. You have no money, you have no way of going from there.
Yeah. A book called The Lean Startup talks about this whole philosophy of failing faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's super, super important because if you are a smart person and you're going to learn from your failures, which should be your goal, by the way, it shouldn't be, I want to succeed. It should be, I want to keep learning. And if you can do that and you can learn from your failures, then it makes sense that you want to fail faster because you want to learn faster. You want to understand these things faster. And honestly, this last 3 years for me on game dev YouTube and on making games and stuff has been a series of failures. It's been a bunch of learning stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things people tell me that they find so valuable about my channel is that I share my failures. I say, guys, here's what I did. It didn't work out at all. Here's why I think it didn't work. Right. And it's so interesting because still people tend to gravitate towards the successes when they should be listening to the people that failed.
Yeah.
Over and over again.
Yeah, and
those are valuable lessons.
Oh yeah, I failed in my YouTube channel in the beginning as well. I had horrible thumbnails. The quality of the videos weren't that good. There were no in-game or video game examples in these videos. And I would like to say I've improved a lot, especially this past year in terms of not only upping the production, but making it better for everyone involved to watch it. And again, a lot of people will just say, "Oh, you were perfect from the beginning. You did everything right." No, and I am a firm believer in that you learn more from failing than you do from succeeding. That if I try something and I know it's not going to work, I'm not going to chase after that. Like people, like my family, I say, why did you quit programming so quickly? Because it wasn't working for me. Like I wasn't understanding it. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. So rather than, again, try to fit a square peg into a round hole, I said, well, what can I do and what do I want to do? And I went in that direction.
See, that's the thing, man. Like, Josh, I follow your channel. I've been watching this stuff forever because you play a ton of games. You give your analysis on design. You talk about all these things. And I think it would be a mistake for you to like try and learn programming and then share that stuff and all that. Your strength is design. Your strength. That's why I watch your channel. And I think a lot of people they focus on trying to fix their weaknesses rather than play to their strengths. Right? Like I think a lot of times it makes more sense to just say, this is what I'm good at. This is what I can do better than anyone else. Just do that. Like people get on me sometimes about my channel because I post unedited videos a lot. I don't edit my videos. I just talk to the camera. It's been like 30-40 minutes lately, just long ass videos. And they're like, Tim, why don't you edit your video Brown thing? You know what? I tried the Mark Brown thing. Okay, I tried the highly edited, highly produced stuff. That's not me. You know what I'm good at? Sitting and talking to a camera about my thoughts for however much amount of time. And that's what I'm good at. And that has gotten me where I'm at. Just doing that. That was the thing I'm good at. It would be a mistake for me to try to be a copy of Mark Brown when I can be the best Tim Ruswick there ever was, right? Like I can do things my way. And same thing with game design, dude. Like I'm not making the most optimal best game in existence. I'm making the most optimal, most resonating game that a solo developer can make in X amount of time, right?
That you can make.
That I can make, exactly. Like my thing, my take on what these things mean. Like, oh man, I could go on this forever. But like people just need to understand that they're the valuable thing and that the things, their unique experiences that they bring to the table, they have been through things that nobody else on the planet has been through. They have experiences, and their brain is the result of the sum total of every day, every hour, every minute that they've experienced, and it is completely unique from anyone else's brain, and they can use that to their
every success and every failure.
Yeah, and you can learn from other people's successes and failures. You don't have to just like try it all yourself. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but at the same time, like if you can listen to people and you can be smart about it and you can approach life with that fail faster scientific method mindset, it doesn't really matter what you do. I think you can make it far.
We did get one question in chat about procedural generation. I think let's talk about that, at least see if we can answer that one, and I think that will probably be our stop point, because if we're not careful we'll be here another 5-10 hours. Again, the audience doesn't mind that, but I know you eventually have to do a stream, and I actually have to eventually do a stream as
Yeah.
well. So
You got to sleep at some point.
sleep is overrated. I think. I think we can all agree on that one. But the question was, let me scroll up here from Tech Teller, and it was about procedural generation. How does one maximize procedural generation while making sure quality isn't compromised? And again, procedural generation, we're not going to be answering that whole question in like even if we go for like an hour. Like, it's a very complicated topic. And it's one, I think, again, that a lot of people have tend to, again, reading the chat right now. Yeah, one day I watched Hackers, and then I became the number one hacker for a day there. But procedural generation is one of those things that it's another thing that I think a lot of people chase after the success of games like Spelunky, FTL, Binding of Isaac, that they think, oh, we'll just let the game make itself. Surely then we don't have to design it at all. It's the perfect game. And it turns out to be a horrible nightmare. And I would defer, I need to get her back on, but Tanya Short of Kit Fox Games has written several books on procedural generation. And you are basically having to do almost double or triple the work in order to get the game to make something to make a game make something that looks like it's handmade.
Yeah. You're not reducing the workload at all. You're just shifting the focus from content to systems, right? Like, that's just the difference. And it's funny because I thought I knew procedural generation. Okay, when I started Cyberpunk, I was like, you know what? I made a few mobile games that procedurally generate their levels. I know what I'm doing. I'm smart. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, why don't people just do it this way? And I made a map. And well, that's why they don't do it that way, because it sucks. It's random. It doesn't make any sense. I think I'm on the 12th version of my map generator for Cyberpunk. Mm-hmm. We have 700 hours in that project. I would say more than half of that time is iterating on the map generator, because the biggest problem in procedural generation isn't the random generation. It's making the random generator interesting. Mm-hmm. Making something interesting, which is a completely different problem than generating a level, right? Mm-hmm. You can generate a level really quick, but is it interesting to play?
Or is it just like a mishmash of various parts?
Yeah. And what compounds it is I'm making a stealth game, right? So it's even more important, because now stealth is about like your cunning and smartness to kind of get around the obstacles without being seen, right? So the design and the placement of enemies and how they interact and all that stuff is super, super important. And how do you do that procedurally? Like that was a completely different challenge. If you're making an action game, okay, you plop a bunch of enemies, you shoot them. It's not great, but it works. Stealth, it doesn't work at all. If an enemy isn't around the key, for example, well, then you just grab the key and go. It's not even a game at that point. So, out of 12 versions, 12 different map generators, completely different algorithms, hundreds of hours of procedure generation, you know what we ended up with? The pretty much the same old Spelunky formula of handmade sections randomly put together. Mm-hmm. And I just it's insane to see that, but it is designing something interesting procedurally. And you have to intimately understand what your game is and how people play it in order to generate a set of rules that a map generator can build and follow. And that very complex.
And that it's also malleable enough that it can offer, different elements or different ways of playing it. And right. I forget if Tanya said this or another developer, but one of the biggest things was, does the procedural generation add to your game? If it doesn't, don't do it, because it will ultimately be easier and probably less nerve-wracking to just hand-make these areas. And a good example, I think, is from the game Darkwood that I played on stream this month. It's a horror game where you have 3 areas that are procedurally generated because they move the points of interest around. Now, again, you would think, okay, it's procedural, that's going to add to the game. But the problem is that everything else around those points of interest is just waste of time. You're just walking through like a nondescript area. So, again, if the only points of your game are going to be these major areas, then why make it procedural? because it's not adding. It's just saying instead of walking left, I walk right. Okay, well, what's going to make me want to come back to this game again and again? And again, like something like Spelunky and the Binding of Isaac works so well because the developers intimately know the rules and the design of their games, and they put that into the procedural generation so that we know that there is a very strict design in Spelunky and Binding of Isaac how each one of those levels are built. But it's done in such a way that it provides a different experience each time you play it while adhering to those rules.
Yeah. People don't realize that things like the bombs and the ropes, they think, oh, they're like special abilities that you have in Spelunky. No, they're core to the design.
Yep.
Because the game really doesn't work without those two things. Those two things fix problems with the procedural generation and the map, right? They allow you to do the things. Actually, the moving chip thing in my game, it fixed the problem with the procedural generation in my map, because now you could move or break chips. The generation of where those chips go can block your path. Before it couldn't. So you ended up always having a direct path to the exit, for example. That was not fun. But those things are actual design challenges as well, and you have to... Well, you know what's interesting that you bring that up, the handmade sections, and does the procedural generation make stuff interesting too, because one of the versions of my map generator for Cyberpunk was the plain old dungeon generator that we've seen in a lot of roguelikes. Rooms are connected by hallways, right? And then the rooms are handmade. But that was for a stealth game, and especially like for a procedure generation game that pulls from handmade content. The problem that you get is that sometimes the content is memorable, and it's memorable enough to kind of break the immersion because you've seen this room layout before, right? And so the problem that I ran into with this dungeon generator of just rooms and hallways is that, like, you see this room type, it's got these two patrolling guards that go back and forth. Every time you see that room, you do the same thing.
It's the same solution.
Same solution. It becomes a puzzle at that point. Each room has a solution, and once you play the game and you recognize the rooms, then it's not good. The current one, funnily enough, the craziest way I saw it was I reduced the amount of distance between rooms so that the procedural generation actually plopped rooms on top of each other and randomly rotated them. And there are hallways between rooms, but a lot of times touching each other, so the hallways don't actually get noticed. But that created all kinds of interesting craziness. Some of the levels look crazy, but when you throw this handmade section of these two patrolling guards over this handmade section of like this trap, right? And you plop them on top of each other, and then you add in these rules that override certain things. Like, for example, holes in the map override other things. Like if I was going to spawn a trap there, but there's a hole and those two things are overlapping, the hole overrides the traps. So I had to add in all these little rules, but what you get is all of these interesting, unique scenarios. And then sometimes rooms cut the walls from other rooms, and so the patrolling guard AI goes farther. It goes into the other room, right? And then it comes back. It does different things. And I was just like, when I did that, I actually did it by accident. Whoa, that's exactly what I want. And ironically, my design philosophy was trying to make something gritty and aesthetically symmetric and like this, because it's a computer game. There's a lot of everything. I wanted that whole feel, but like, it's crazy to me that plopping them on top of each other seemed to work out pretty well. And maybe, I don't know if the game will ship with a different of that, but that achieves exactly what you were talking about. Is now it's not just I approach this room this way, it's this room is connected to this other room in various different ways, in various different rotations, and because of that the result is different. And the goal wasn't so much to just have the game make my content for me, it's to make the game different every time that you play, while still keeping it interesting. And all that to say that procedure generation is going to take a lot of iteration, and it's going to take a lot of handmade rules to make things. You really have to understand your design, like really, really bad to make things work.
Yeah. And like to me, like that's the difference between something like the game Heat Signature versus a game like The Binding of Isaac. In Heat Signature, they use procedurally generated ships, but there's only so few variations of ship types. So that I always know if I go on this ship, I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z, or I know I'm going to be going here and here. And then it just becomes a grind of, okay, I go right, right, or I go left, left. But it's still the same general path. And Biohazard, the level designs are 100% handmade, but I don't know what items I'm going to get in between them. So one run I may have a triple shot, one run I may be just shooting bombs at people, and all that changes what I'm doing at a moment-to-moment basis. I was thinking like the game Invisible Ink I think gets close, but I don't think it goes far enough in terms of procedural generation. And they run that same issue that here's my start, here's my end point, and then everything in between will be mixed up, but all I really care about is what's at the end. Everything in the middle is just, again, that's just me going through the motions. So it doesn't really change if I still have the same exact goal every time I play.
Yeah. I mean, some of the gadgets and stuff in Invisible Ink can kind of change the way you play, the characters you take with you and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, generally, the game didn't really hold my attention much. And it was interesting trying to tackle what I think is a similar problem, making a procedural stealth game. But doing it in a different way. Like my design has trade-offs too, I think. Like it's Invisible Ink actually, when I play the levels, a lot of times they're good enough to where I don't feel like they're randomly generated, right? Like it seems like maybe that's the aesthetics, maybe it's the quality of like the art assets or whatever, but it just feels, some of them feel handmade, some of them feel like, wait, what? That's the whole thing? Like there are issues here and there. But it's an interesting problem to try and solve because like what you're after is the variance, right? At least for like roguelike design. That's what I'm after. And like I want this game to be different the next time you play it, even though you're going through the same game loop on the same thing. And so how do you do that? Okay, well, the level being different is a good thing. But if it's the same game and still the only thing that's different is the level design, is that enough? The thing is, everything you add on top of that, and this is tricky too, because you can get lost in content world and think content is the solution, which it's not. But like you take, in Slay the Spire, for example, like you take modifiers or the different cards that you acquire along your deck. Mathematically, that adds a ton of depth because now you're not just doing a run and playing a card game. The cards that you acquire along the way dramatically change each encounter that you're going through. They change the stuff that comes up in your hand. They change the decisions that you have to make when you're playing a card. They change all that. On top of that, you've got the modifiers and stuff. I forget what they're called, the little icon thingies.
You mean like ascension runs, or do you mean just like different like enemy or different events that show up in the map?
Don't you get like little items that have like passive
the traits? Relics.
Relics. Those add another layer on top of the card, and then so on and so forth. Like each one of those on their own, it's like, okay, it's cool, but then systemically they all integrate to create this like multiplier effect of okay, now I'm in this dungeon with this enemy, with these cards, with that item, and that is a completely different scenario than the other scenario. And that's one of those ways where that procedural generation really works. A lot of people, they'll add in, I like the relics in Darkest Dungeon or in Slay the Spire. I'm going to add those in my game. But is that the right choice? Like, does that systemically, like, the thing about a relic, for example, is, or even a card, right? That card can influence a series of other systems.
Yes.
And each card, let's say it adds 1 unit of complexity, it might add 10 units of depth, right? So it's an elegant design choice. Whereas if you add a relic system to your game, it may add 1 unit of complexity, but it might only add 1 unit of depth, which is not always a good trade-off, right? Or 2 units of complexity and 1 unit of depth. That makes sense.
It creates all those dynamics of how these various systems and mechanics interact with each other. Again, with like as you said with Slay the Spire, if on one run I get card A and relic B, that's going to be different on another run if I got card F and relic L. And it's all about creating that sense of variance. Because again, like you're never going to create a game that is going to procedurally generate the goals or can procedurally generate end conditions. We're getting to like Skynet, AI that's learning itself kind of thing. But you want that path through the game to feel different.
Yeah.
Shark and I were both playing the game The Swords of Ditto. This was a kind of like a Zelda roguelike. It's like you have the isometric or top-down perspective. You're going around solving dungeons, but it's procedurally generated. And we had that same issue that, yes, the world is different. Yes, we're going to these different dungeons, but there's no real sense of variance. Nothing is really affecting something that's affecting something else. It's just, okay, instead of doing A, B, C, I do B, A, C. It's the same thing, just a different order. And
Right.
again, something like Slay the Spire, Spelunky, Binding of Isaac, it's always about making the player, I think, pivot. That you have to change what you're doing. What was it? Dungeon of the Endless is another really crazy example of that. Super complicated and challenging game. And it's one of those games that, again, like, you still have your end goal, but you have to constantly pivot as to what's going on each floor. If you try and do the same thing each time, you're going to lose, because the game is not designed around having one way of winning.
Right. That's where that variance comes in too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think if your game can be completely procedural, completely non-variant,
Yeah.
like you said, instead of ABC, it's CBA. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's still, that's not interesting. But like, if you have those things that can multiply with each other
Mm-hmm.
and create exponentially larger scenarios, I think that's what you want. That's what you should aim for in procedural generation. And I also think that's one of those things that when you're prototyping, you have to lock down soon, because if you're doing it right, adding those systems later on is going to be a lot more complicated.
Oh, yes. You don't want to change your game 75% of the way done and say, hey, let's make it all procedurally generated. I'm sure it won't break anything.
And that's the thing, is like, it's funny that you mentioned that people think procedural generation is easier, because I made that mistake. Philophobia, after 4 years, it's so much content. I make level after level after level. I was just like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a procedural generated game where I don't got to make content. And then I end up making
it's the perfect game idea. Nothing can go wrong.
Now it's so much systems work. And on top of that, the only map generator that I like relies on pre-made content. So now I'm doing systems and content.
It's just like me with like what I'm doing with the libraries. I hate being on the phone and talking to people. I did that at customer service. I don't want to do that anymore. So guess what I'm doing every day? I'm on the phone talking to people and calling them. We've talked about this on Discord. I could just have a tape recorder of my same speech, because that's just what I've been saying for the last 4 months now. I'll be saying for the next year or so. It's the same exact thing. And there's one other point about procedural generation, then I'll throw it over to you, Tim, if there's anything else. But one thing I wanted to bring up that I think is very important is having the design be malleable enough to have those crazy spikes in terms of how far things can go. And what I mean by that, in Binding of Isaac and Slay the Spire in particular, there are some insane builds that they break the game. Like, if you get the right relic and the right card, nothing's going to stop you in that game. I've had friends who've gotten those mythical builds. I've gotten them a few times myself. And there's this tendency to, I think, kind of over-design, especially with procedural generation, that to avoid those extremes. But I think a major part of roguelike design procedural generation is that it can get crazy like that. Sometimes the game just hates you. Just as sometimes it can throw you. Like, I've had Binding of Isaac runs where I get like one of the best items in the game on floor 1, and then the whole run is just basically set at that point.
Yeah, I think the synergy is really, really important. Designing around synergy, but also a lot of designers, like you said, with how they grab the controller away, you say you're playing it wrong. They also tend to do that with their design elements too. Like, oh, people are abusing that. Let's nerf it. Let's take it out. Let's, bring it to the ground. No, like, especially if it's a single player game, like, let them have the fun. The problem comes around with games that don't have those systemic systems. Like Slay the Spire, you're starting over every time. And if you get a legendary build and you get lucky enough, go for it. Have fun, right?
Yep.
Like you gotta, first of all, you gotta recognize it. You gotta understand it. So you gotta be smart enough to do that. But also, it doesn't happen every time. It doesn't affect other players. And it creates a very memorable experience that other runs don't. That's a good thing in that kind of game. You take that same mechanic and you like an RPG, and you just give the player some kind of super sword right up front that kills all the enemies in one hit. Like, okay, that can break your whole design, right?
Yeah.
That can break the XP system, that can break the damage system, that can break all kinds of stuff. But that's why understanding your game and your genre, I think, is so important, because like that decision in different types of games can make things better or make things worse.
Yep.
Right. I have an ability called Decon in Cyberpunk, and it allows you to. So there are these tiles, and there are these resources on these tiles, and you can grab the resources off the tiles, but you can't grab one at a time. And sometimes there are these skulls on the tiles that will hurt you if you grab them. There's an ability that allows you to basically decontaminate all the tiles that you see and wipe the bad resources. And then there's another ability that allows you to siphon all the tiles that you see. So those two things together, it's kind of broken. Like you know, if you can decontaminate everything and then siphon everything, it kind of breaks the whole game, but it completely changes your run. And then suddenly it's not about resources anymore. The whole game is about finding the right ability that can make use of those resources, right? That can use them properly. And at first I was going to nerf like how the stuff worked, but after watching one person play it and then realizing that no one else even managed to find those combinations of things, I was like, okay, that's actually kind of like, it doesn't matter that there's things that are great and break the game because of the variance, because you can't find them every run, every time, over and over again. If I gave you a choice of what abilities you wanted every time you started a game,
you
would always pick the best one, right? There would be discussions, and then people would decide what the great one was, and then boom, that's the only build you play. But because of the variance, because of the difference in playthroughs, because of the changes that happen all over all this stuff, it changes everything. And I think that's a lot of mistakes that people make too, is like they copy something from a game without realizing the underlying design mechanics of why it works.
Exactly. Yep. And again, like with something like the Bind of Isaac, there are game-breaking builds. There are plenty of them in that game, but the chance that you're going to get that on every run is minuscule. And like you said, like if it's something that's rewarding, it's something that's hard to get, and it's overpowered, yeah, leave it in. That's a reward. You know, if it was something that the player could get in the first 20 seconds of playing the game, they could do that every time, then yes, that's a problem. That is completely overboard in that regard. And again, I think like another tendency for developers when they come with procedural generation, as you said earlier, that just keep throwing more in. Throw everything in. You know, who needs rules? You know, like we said, it's simple. Just let the game make a level. It just does it all itself. But again, I think ultimately for this question, the big point is that you need to have an absolute mastery of what your design is if you want to be able to do procedural generation, because you have to teach that to the AI. It has to know, okay, don't spawn the start and the exit right next to each other, because then what's the point of making the rest of the level? And I actually ran into it. We were playing the roguelike Fallback the other night, and it did just that. Like, I started the room, I took 5 steps out, we're already at the boss store. Okay, well, guess what? The entire level's a waste then, because I'm done.
Yeah. I think good procedural generation is a series of rules and concepts on how your world works. You know what's interesting though is like so many of those systems are intertwined. Like people think, okay, I got to build a map generator, and they think of it as a map generator that generates a map. But you know what else is really important in that? The AI of the enemies that go in that map. Because like, for example, I have enemies that patrol. And originally I had a horizontal patrol behavior that would go side to side and a vertical patrol behavior that would go up and down. But what happens if you spawn a vertical patrol enemy in a place where they're blocked vertically. It's not interesting.
Yeah.
So what I had to do was I had to make a smarter patrol behavior that could actually adapt on the fly. So then it could change positions and go different ways. It could still be a patrol enemy. It would just go different ways. That not only, I mean, you could argue it was a problem with the map generator, maybe, but I liked the maps that it produced. So by changing the AI instead of the map generator itself, it made everything more universal and compatible. And it also added that additional depth, because there's no reason why I need a hard code vertical or horizontal patrol behaviors. They can just be one, and it can be smart enough to figure out which one it should do. There are situations where I want like a specific room to have ones, but even then I want them to be smart enough to change on the fly if they need to. And little things like that are so intertwined. Like you would think, how does the enemy AI interact with a map generator? But it's super important. It's also super important because when enemies hit an electric trap, they get hurt. Well, what happens if you spawn an enemy in a room that's like blocked with electric traps? They're going to end up killing themselves. Like, how did those work? Should you spawn an electric trap in the same room with an enemy? Should the enemy even be able to get hurt? If they can, your decision is different, right? Like, they're so intertwined. All of the systems are intertwined, and it's insane. People think of it as a map generator, but it's not a map generator. It's a game generator.
Yep.
That's what you're building. It's much more important than people think it is.
All these little rules, all these little mechanics and systems have to come together. Not only do they have to come together, they have to make sense. And not only do they have to make sense, but they also have to be designed so they can be done in, infinity different ways. And it is hard. Like, that's the point. Like, this is not easy stuff we're talking about. Good procedural generation is master level game design.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with Spelunky 2. Because they've been working on that one for a long time. It's been delayed to 2020. And again, like, Spelunky is one of those games that it hits that sweet spot. It's not a deep game. It's not a complicated game. But it's probably one of the best examples of procedural generation. I think it's one of the few examples of an action-based game working in procedural gen. Like, even something like Dead Cells, I don't think it quite hits that level. Because it doesn't create enough variance. And again, like, that's a topic in of itself right there.
Yeah, I think so. I'm excited for the future procedure generation because I've heard a lot of developers say this, but I feel this way too. Like, I love being surprised by my own systems. I love being able to play a game and have it surprise me, even though I designed all the systems. And I think procedural generation is the future, but I think there are a lot of... That's why I respect people like Tanya Short and all that, because they have taken this field so far. Tanya is fantastic. I've watched so many of her GDC talks. She has been like extremely sharing with her knowledge, and they've tried all kinds of stuff, and it's fantastic that people share that kind of stuff.
I remember playing their first game. I think it was Shatter Planet. I think that's what it was called, and it was a very basic roguelike. And to see how much they've learned from that and grow. Like, I'm really excited to see how Boyfriend Dungeon turns out in terms of that kind of design layer. But again, it's always about having to grow and learn in terms of how these elements work. And it's not something you're going to get right on your first try. Like, there's just no way. But again, like we've said over the course of this cast, it's always about trying to figure out the why. Why does this need to be this way? And then having that connective line being drawn from element to element. Like your example with the patrol patterns being a good one. That why should it just... If I'm designing these maps, then why do I need to design the maps? Because of the patrol pattern. But if I change that patrol pattern, that changes how the map generation works. Right. And it just goes around in a circle. Yeah.
And I think that's why you have to pay attention and understand stuff. Like, a lot of people just like to make stuff and develop stuff, as I call it, not design stuff. But like, as you play this game and you look at it from that design perspective, or any game really, like, you look at it, okay, you have to identify the problems, which is like what we've been talking about. We go full circle a lot. When you can see a problem, like, okay, these enemies going back and forth are stuck in a room, which makes it not interesting because the player can just go around them, right? Like, where is that problem? Is that a map generator problem? Is that an AI problem? is that a player problem, like identifying where exactly that problem is, or maybe it's multiple problems, who knows? Identifying that and then figuring out what the best way to solve it is with the minimum amount of complexity and the maximum amount of depth with your limited dev time. That's probably the most complex problem you could tackle, but it's so much fun to make games.
All right. I think with that, we just past the 3 hour mark. I think we can probably stand to wrap things up. But as always, Tim, you are welcome back on whenever we have free time. We can certainly do another one of these.
It's fun, dude. I like this. 3 hours. It seems like
I know. It
30
just seems
minutes.
like an hour. Like it just went by. But I figure since we have both of our audiences here, we'll go through our usual like little beats in terms of following and stuff like that. So since you're the guest, Tim, I'll let you go first.
Cool. You guys want more from me? I talk about everything: motion, game dev, self improvement, all kinds of stuff. You can go on Gamedev Underground on YouTube, or you can go on Tim Ruswick on Twitch. I stream Thursdays and Fridays, 3 p.m. Eastern. I stream my game, and I'm currently in the middle of a 1,000-hour experiment where I make a stealth hacking roguelike in under 1,000 hours and see if we can make it commercially successful. I would love for you to join me, and I'm glad to be here. Game Wisdom is one of my favorite channels.
Thank you. And you, of course, have your own Discord channel. And did you mention your Twitter? I'm not sure.
Twitter, I'm at Tim Ruswick, and Discord you can find if you go to Gamedev Underground, any of the videos, or gdu.io, you'll to our Discord channel, which has thousands of developers all over the globe that are trying to help each other make games. We don't focus so much on the technical aspect of making games. It's more the motivational and design aspect of actually finishing games. So that's what we're about.
All right. And for myself, if you like talking about game design and the industry, that's pretty much where I fit with Game Wisdom. I have daily videos on design, game spotlights, nightly streams. We're now doing a once a month indie spotlight stream where you can submit any games that you want, alpha, beta, whatever, it doesn't matter. It could be a small title, a big one, and I will play it and help give it exposure. We have our Discord channel linked down below where we talk design and industry. We have a section for we have our own little game dev section for people talking about design or talking more about the technical side. But if you like talking about game design or interested in learning more, that's something where I come in. You can find, again, the Discord link down below. I'm on Twitter at GW Bycer. Again, you can check out my books available online now. CRC Press is the one who publishes them. And if you are a developer working on a game and like to come on and talk, we are always looking for new guests, whether the podcast is live or recorded. But I think that is it for me. Oh, and I stream nightly around 9:30 EST as our starting time. But I think that's all I have to say. Do you have anything to end the cast on, Tim?
Nope, I really enjoyed the talk, and I'm glad I got to hang out with you and the lovely people watching us.
All right, and I'm sure we'll be doing it again in the near future.
Yeah, I'm down.
All right. So, with that said, folks, we're going to end things here. If you're watching this live, this will go up in record form in a few weeks with my Patreon supporters getting first and ad-free access to it. But come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, Worries of the Art and Science of Games. And I'll be back later tonight for our game stream with some horror and other titles. But have a great night. Be sure to check out Tim's channel and stream. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, Worries of the Art and Science of Games. Until next time, everybody, take care.
See ya.